You're listening to ThunderQuack Podcast Network.
Hello there, and welcome back to Force Perspectives. I am your host, Michael Cohen, and joining me, as always, my counterpart, Joe Hogan.
That is me.
Yeah, Joe, this is our 50th episode
That's
of
crazy.
Force Perspectives.
How many have I been here for? I have no idea. When did
I?
Do we know? Do we remember when I jumped in?
Okay,
Started jumping in.
So yeah, we do because you started regularly appearing on Force Perspectives as of the 6th episode, which is when we started
Oh my
Mando.
God, really?
Mando
been around
season
that
3.
long?
Yeah, Mando
Wow.
season 3, right? So the first 6 episodes were let's see, like, so I did 3 of them in 2022. And that was like sort of that, like the format where I was like basically like interviewing my friends about Star Wars. And I had the brilliant idea to go to like my podcast friends that are not Star Wars fans, and I thought that would be fun, like to discuss Star Wars with people who weren't like, part of the regular rotation. It was a terrible idea. um no offense to the friends that were included there, but the problem with that is that, like, so Curtis was the second one, and then Andy Babak was the third one. And the problem with both of those episodes, they're great episodes, I think we have awesome conversations, they're not very Star Wars focused. Right, like Curtis goes off on a whole thing about animation, and we talk about like Nelvana, and like it's a whole thing because that's Curtis's area, right? So that's like that, he connected that into Star Wars. And then with Andy, we ended up talking more than anything about Black Adam. When it ended up basically being a review of Black Adam, which like is not appropriate for a Star Wars podcast. And then the 2 episodes after that, I did. So there's an episode, I think it might just be me by myself talking about the first couple episodes of Willow, with the intent to do week to week for Willow, and then I didn't end up doing week to week for Willow. And so then the 5th episode is me and Ty talking about Willow, which is a great episode. But it's like a thing on the whole first season. The only season. Let's not pretend like that's ever gonna happen, but which is a shame. But Lucasfilm, it's a problem. And then yeah, we've got the 10 episode. No, how many episodes is season 3 of Mando? Because I 1, 2, 3.
I think they're 8,
5,
right?
6, 7, 8 episodes for season 3 of Mando. So that's when you came in, and I think you're on all 8 of those.
Well, I was in Europe for some of them.
There might be one that you missed. Yeah.
I was away for 3 weeks, so I think.
And then we take a pretty substantial break. About a month, and then I come back with Marty, and I did our 6 episodes for Obi-Wan. And then I've got there's a random one here, the 20th episode. I don't remember what that is, and the album, I didn't do specific album art for it, so it's like I'd have to pull it up. But I think that's us. I think that's you and I. And then we have Ahsoka, which were not released. Right, we recorded them and didn't release them. So right. The feed was dormant for a little while, right. and then came back. I think we maybe released. I don't remember if we released them to Patreon in that time, or if we just like sat on them. I think
I think we waited in general, until solidarity.
Yeah, until the end of the strike. And then from 28 forward, it's been you and I doing like our topics, and then Acolyte, and then back to the topics. So yeah, I mean, like it adds up. It's funny how that goes. But Forced Perspectives it was previously Faster, More Intense. So the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian are technically episodes of Faster, More Intense. And then I took that feed over for Forced Perspectives and turned it into kind of a different show. But then we ended up doing, Mando and Ahsoka and Obi-Wan recaps anyway. So it is, for all intents and purposes, the same podcast. But
happy 50th episode, my friend.
So
that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work, man.
Yeah. Sure. I from a certain point of view. But yeah, I mean, like, the thing is that 50 episodes for me is such a drop in the bucket. Like when I say that I have lost track of the number of episodes, I mean that I have lost track of the number of episodes, because let's see, we have like 138 numbered episodes of Frontlines, the Clone Wars podcast, but there are bonuses in there, because there's at least 2 April Fool's episodes, because I did Frontier, the Star Trek podcast, for the first April that I was doing the podcast, and then Kyle and I did Calibrations, the Mass Effect podcast.
Cool.
For one of them, and so like there's like 140-ish Frontlines episodes. Rebel Cells, which started as Rebels podcast, I think Rebel Cells, because I have those are all numbered together, and let me open the folder for Rebels. We're at like 242. We're coming up on 250 episodes of Rebels / Rebel Cells. So like 50 is like I said, it's a drop in the bucket when you compare it to that, right? Because even just putting those 2 together, and then Quiver, we have 170 episodes. That's 7 seasons of TV, right?
By the way, did we know before yesterday that Skeleton Crew is debuting with 2 episodes?
I don't know that we had that specific information. I mean, like, that's kind of become status quo, right? They tend to do that now. It's the premiere is a 2-hour thing, and then every week is 1 episode. But yeah, man, I mean, like, ThunderQuack, man, so many episodes, 87 episodes. That's just with Amanda, and then you and I doing ThunderQuack was a different thing, and we did 13 of those in the short time that we did that. So yeah, man, I've done so many shows. I've done so many podcasts. I've lost count of that. And if I count that right now, Cartoon Afternoon, so that's 1, Forced Perspectives, Irregularly Scheduled, Metaphysical Fiction, which I did with Carl for I think we did 3 episodes of that. Nuff Said was our Marvel one that we did a couple episodes of. Off the Record, Perfect 10, Pullbox Podcast, Quiver, Rebel Cells, the ThunderQuack podcast twice over. So, but we'll just count it as 1, and then Way Past Cool. So I have that's 12 podcasts, 12 different shows, that I've done in 16 years. So
nerd.
Yeah, man. Super lame. All of that time could have been better spent on literally anything else. but the people who are listening to this don't agree. So, well, I hope that they don't agree. I don't know. I hope none of you are hate listening, but I
don't agree.
Yeah, it's 50 episodes of Forced Perspectives, which is pretty good. And what better way to celebrate a milestone than by, let's take it to basics, man. We're gonna talk about our favorite original trilogy characters on this episode. But before we do that, really quick, everybody listening to this, please go listen to the season premiere of Perfect 10. It just released last week, and I'm really proud of it. Perfect 10 is my favorite podcast that I record, but nobody listens to it. The download numbers are just abysmal on it. I that it breaks my heart every time I publish an episode, and I know that like the 30 of you that listen to everything are listening to it and you're enjoying it, and so I will keep doing it for you, and I will keep doing it for my friends that come on the show that love recording. Like that's the thing about it, is that like I've had people on Perfect 10 that I've had on like almost every other show to a degree, right? And the thing that I hear from everybody is that they have a great time recording Perfect 10. Like all of my friends love to do the show, and and like the hardcore listeners love listening to the show, even when it's topics that they don't have any passion for. They just it's fun to listen to two people be excited about something that they love, right? And for that reason it's fun to record. But specifically the season premiere episode for season 3 that we just released is about Reboot, which is my favorite TV show of all time. So and I recorded it with Marie Claire Gould from What the Force, one of my favorite people to record with. So yeah, it's just the two of us just geeking out about this show that we love so much. That's really like a part of, I don't know for Americans how much this is true. I know that a lot of people remember the show and maybe have fond memories of it, but if you're Canadian, if you're basically a Canadian millennial, or like, sort of like that Gen X millennial cusp area, like that transition period, then like Reboot is a part of the culture for sort of that age range.
I've got a question for you that's going to immediately take you off the rails, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
feel like it's not a question that you guys would talk about on there. But it's for you because it's your favorite show ever,
yeah,
and I think it's an important question. If they announced today we're doing another reboot series,
yeah.
how upset or excited would you be about that?
So the caveat to that is that they did do that.
Did they really? Are you serious?
They did a new series,
When?
Reboot the Guardian Code, which Netflix produced with Mainframe, but Mainframe Studios is so it's currently Mainframe Studios. What is Mainframe Studios is not the same. It's not the same studio that made Reboot back in the
Okay.
90s. So Mainframe Entertainment was the original company. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that it's Mainframe Entertainment. They made Reboot. I They existed to make Reboot, right? Like the great
Really?
thing right now is that, so there's a documentary called Reboot Rewind that literally just launched this week. So the first 2 episodes are up on YouTube. So anybody listening to this can go watch the first 2 episodes of Reboot Rewind. You just search it up on YouTube. But if you go to there's an initiative by one of our telecoms here called Story Hive, through Telus, and I Story Hive is awesome. Like Telus is it's like any telecommunications corporation. Like they're terrible. It's a they're ripping people off and giving crappy service and all of the stuff that you would expect from anybody who provides mobile and internet and TV and all that stuff. So Telus is not a great company, but within Telus, somehow, because we're in Canada and this is the way that Canadians think and work, somebody created this initiative called Story Hive, which basically like bankrolls like these like indie productions, like local productions. It's basically like the 2024 equivalent of public access, but like
Oh, okay, cool.
but like funded, right? So if you can pitch something to Story Hive, and then Telus will like give you money to produce it. So it's one of the very few things that a corporation like that does that is like a worthwhile effort. So 2 local creatives and massive fans of Reboot here in Vancouver, because Mainframe is from Vancouver. um I they pitched a documentary series about the making of Reboot, and the first 2 episodes are out. It's an 8 episode documentary series. It's over 6.5 hours long. It is so in depth. It's incredible. So you can get the whole story of Mainframe and Reboot and all of it by watching the documentary. It's really, really well made. Like, it's not just that I love the subject matter. They've actually done a really good job. Like, did you know the RoboDoc, the RoboCop documentary? It's like
No, I don't think
it's
so.
like a 3 or 4 part, I can't remember how many parts it is, but it's like this super long documentary on the making of the first RoboCop.
Okay.
Actually, maybe it even goes into 2 and 3, but it's mostly focused on the first RoboCop and sort of the trials and tribulations, and it's like interviews with all of the actors, all of the everybody who's still alive to talk about it, right?
Mm.
And it's so in depth and it's fantastic. RoboDoc is awesome. Reboot Rewind is like that for Reboot. It's so
Okay, cool.
crazy in depth, and they've talked to everybody that they possibly can, and it's phenomenal. It's fantastic. But if you want to know more about Reboot and Mainframe, then that's the best place to go, because I'm gonna like summarize and miss pieces and stuff. But Mainframe was a company that was like founded here in Vancouver because it was the cheapest place for them to do computer animation. So there's no other reason. It's actually, the 3 guys from the UK, but but they came to Vancouver, and it's like, oh, it's cheap here and it's beautiful and it's a wonderful place to be. So like, let's do it here. And I they made Reboot, and then they made Beast Wars. And then from there, Mainframe
Oh,
went on
cool. I didn't
to
realize that was the same
yeah. So
studio.
they made Beast Wars and Beast Machines. They made another show in the States. It was called War Planets. Up here, it was called Shadow Raiders, because you weren't allowed to have the word war in the title of the show. Beast Wars was also called Beasties up here.
Ah, okay. No wars. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
I
did you guys not get Star Wars?
No, well, no, that's the thing, is that like by the time that Star Wars had a
Yeah.
TV show, it
Yeah.
didn't matter anymore. Um, but yeah, so like they made all of this great computer animated stuff, and they pioneered it, right? Um, but as you got into like the late 90s and early 2000s, and Mainframe was doing a lot of, like, I think they were doing like the Barbie movies and TV shows and stuff. They weren't as like prolific as they had been at one point in time, and
Okay.
I a studio here called Rainmaker that I guess might I don't really know the details of it, but like my guess would be that they had the capital, but sort of like Rainmaker was very much a local studio without sort of like a globally recognized name. They
Mm-hmm.
bought Mainframe. Um, they didn't immediately rebrand as Mainframe Studios, but at a certain point they decided to drop Rainmaker. So it was Mainframe Entertainment and Rainmaker Studios, and so I like in the process of all of that, I think maybe once everything was finalized or something, they became Mainframe Studios. So they're currently Mainframe Studios, and I Mainframe Studios made Reboot the Guardian Code. Reboot the Guardian Code was commissioned by Netflix, and it was a very odd thing, because like Netflix didn't put Reboot on their service prior to Guardian Code, which is wild to me. It's like, I don't understand why you guys wouldn't license it and have the original series on there. But then
Yeah.
it made more sense once Guardian Code came out, because Guardian Code essentially had nothing to do with the original series.
Oh, okay.
And the original series like has a cliffhanger ending that like is
Mm.
unresolved to this day, that drives fans nuts. So
Not even like comics or anything has stepped in to.
there have been fan projects and stuff to try and come
Okay.
in and do it, but yeah, nothing official. And one of the main reasons for that is that the creators of Reboot know what the rest of the story is, and so
Uh.
they are they have kind of held out for the opportunity to finish the
Mm.
story. Um, so yeah, Guardian Code is a completely different thing. It's a hybrid live action computer
Okay.
animated show. It is essentially Tron. It's not actually Reboot, even though Reboot is kind of Tron. Like, Reboot is kind of Tron adjacent, because
Mm.
Tron from 1982 is like, oh, we go into the computer, and like inside the computer are all of these programs, and the programs are people, right? and Reboot's a very similar idea to that, but there's no like humans don't go in and you know, sprites and binomes can't come out of the Reboot world into the real world. But the Guardian Code was 3 kids. They go in, they go into the server and they become guardians. And they're there to protect they're there to protect mainframe from Megabyte and Hexadecimal, the viruses. But like they redesigned Megabyte and Hexadecimal, and I
By the way, I'm sorry to everyone who tuned into this
yeah,
original
for Star
Trilogy
Wars.
characters episode, fully knowing that I was gonna derail this. So I'm sorry to everybody, but
So it's like it's even worse than it being completely unrelated to the original series. There is an episode where they go into an old computer, and it's mainframe from the original series,
ah,
but it's mainframe from the original series as if the original series never happened.
oh no,
So
no,
like they go in and like and Bob and Dot and Enzo, like it's mostly I think they interact with Bob, but then at the end of the episode you see Dot and Enzo, and it's like the thing about Reboot is that the 3rd season things go like buck wild on that show, and it's like the limiters are off, and all of a sudden like the show became like this super like like a serious like basically sci-fi adventure show, right?
Mhm.
And Enzo, you know, gets trapped in a game and you know grows up, and he's all like badass with he's got a missing eye that's replaced with like a robotic eye, and he's all like hardcore and stuff. And Bob has gone missing in the web, and they got to go rescue him and stuff. Like it's like season 3 goes crazy with like how much it deviates from the first 2 seasons, which were very much like adventure of the week in mainframe, right? But then season 3 is like no, there's a larger universe to all of this. So the idea that you would just negate all of that and be like no, there nothing has changed, they're just still having silly adventures, cartoon adventures. And if you know anything about the making of Reboot, you know that like that's antithetical to what the creators wanted to do with the show. Because in season 3 was when they got to ABC was no longer bankrolling them, and they just got to do what they wanted to do. Because yeah, YTV wrote them a blank check essentially. So like, just make a show, we love it. Again, Reboot Rewind, go watch the documentary, it's fantastic. But yeah, so we got our reboot, and it was not well received by the original fans, and Netflix kind of buried it, as they are wont to do with things that aren't immediate successes. So it never even found an audience with a new fan base. And so the franchise has kind of been DOA as a result, because Rainmaker looks at it as like, well, we tried and it didn't work. And so
Yeah.
I think they look at the IP as like as a non-starter. But here's the thing about Guardian Code: it had nothing, like the original creators had nothing to do with it. So because Mainframe Studios and Rainmaker, what is Rainmaker and is now Mainframe Studios, they own the IP, right? Like they have the rights to the IP. The creators of the series don't. So so they like they can be hired to do it, but Mainframe decided not to do that. They decided to go their own way with it, for whatever reason. And so it's completely unrelated, and just kind of, it feels a bit like a slap in the face. I don't think that it's meant to be. I think it's just the way that things went. Like it just, you know. But if you told me that a new season of Reboot was coming from the original creators, specifically Gavin Blair, like if Gavin was involved, then I would be excited. Any other circumstance, I am very suspect of. The only thing that would be upsetting if I found out that a new season of Reboot was happening I like it, like, oh, it's coming and like they're already making it or whatever, is that I would be upset that I have nothing to do with it. Being that I am in Vancouver, and yeah, would love to, like, that would be like, even more than Star Wars, I think that would be the dream, is to
Mm.
work on that show. So yeah, I don't know, man. It's the 30th anniversary this year, and that's why we did it as the season premiere of
Mm.
Perfect 10. And that's why the documentary has come out. And there is a lot of renewed interest. So I don't know. I've got my fingers crossed that that something comes of it, and I you know, that I have enough feelers out that if something is going to come of it, that I can wedge myself into it and try and get in and work on the show in some way. But
Biases
yeah,
aside, do you think it holds, like, because I have zero nostalgic attachment to it, but
yeah,
like the people who love that show. So should
yeah,
I give it another chance in 2024, or am I going to be like, my delicate sensibilities don't agree with the
yeah.
show
I
anymore?
think so. So you have to. I don't. It's hard. I think it would be hard to get a kid to check it out, like
Mm.
the core demographic for that first season. I think that it would be hard to get them into it. I know that like my girls are kind of like, they're kind of half in half out, like they're not really sold on it, because the animation is very primitive, right?
Sure.
Like especially on those first two seasons. That said, about halfway through season 2, the story stops being the sort of like the adventure of the week, and it starts to become serialized.
Right.
Things that happened in previous episodes start affecting the next episode and the next episode and the next episode. By the end of season 2, like the finale of season 2 is a, a gut-wrenching cliffhanger, and like I said, like Bob is like lost in the web, right? So he's our main character for season 1 and 2. And there's a transition in the season finale where Enzo becomes the main character, and from that point forward, absolutely it holds up. The storytelling is like top tier animated content. Now there are episodes in there that I think are kind of, they're episodes of a cartoon show,
Mm.
but overall that story, I think in season 3 becomes something on par with like early seasons of Clone Wars, like the
Okay.
first 4 seasons of Clone Wars, I would say. I And then it's the thing is that between season 2 and season 3 there's a 2-year break, and then between season 3 and season 4 there's a significant break. Season 4 comes back, and it's actually done in 2 movies, and it was supposed to be, I think, 3 or 4 movies, but we only got 2 of them.
Mm.
And they are, because they're formatted that way, they're very different. And so the fandom is kind of split on them.
Okay.
At the time that they aired, I was not a huge fan. As an adult now, I watch them and I think that they're actually quite good. But yeah, so I don't know. I think mileage is going to vary for a lot of people, but at the same time, if you're here on a Star Wars podcast and you're hearing me talk about Reboot, if you are a Star Wars fan, the people who made this show are also Star Wars fans. Like to a very serious degree, and there's a lot of that in Reboot, like a lot in Reboot. So I would say, like, as Star Wars fans, if you're a fan of animation and like the history of animation, I think that it's required viewing, because we don't get to Clone Wars, we don't get to, I don't know, man, what's the League of Legends show, Arcane, is that what
Yeah.
it's called?
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like you don't get those shows without Reboot literally going first. And like if you have any affinity for Beast Wars, like it's a lot of the same people. And that's how that came about. Um, yeah, I love it, and it is my favorite show of all time for very nostalgic reasons, because of a time and a place. But that said, I do still think it's an incredibly well crafted show from start to finish. Like it is incredibly well made, and the care and attention is there. So I think it's worthwhile for anybody, but I do think that you have to go into the first two seasons with the context that this is 1990. I mean, like, the original season was being produced in 1992 and 93, and sorry, 94 and 93, 93 94. They sort of started production in 1992, early stuff of like trying to get the show going, but pre-production, I guess. So yeah, like, it is very dated, right? But in the same way that you can go back and you can watch Toy Story and look at that very primitive Pixar animation and appreciate it for what it is, I think you should be able to go back and watch Reboot and the first season of Beast Wars, and look at those and go like, wow, no one was doing this. Like, this is absolutely pioneering shit. Like, I and appreciate that for what it is. Um, I think to watch the documentary and then try going back into the show would be the best approach. Maybe watching like the first 3 episodes of the doc. Actually, maybe even the first 4 episodes of the doc, which kind of covers season 1 and season 2, and then stopping and like watching through season 1 and 2, and then watch season 3 because there are like twists and turns in season 3, and then go back to the documentary after that, because I think that it's more fun if some stuff isn't spoiled for you, but if you don't already know the story. But yeah, man, it's a great show. It's my favorite show of all time. So if anything that I say about other things resonates, then it's worth checking out. And again, as a Star Wars fan, I think it's kind of required
And
viewing.
remind me, this is the documentary is also on Netflix, or is that also
No, the documentary is on YouTube. It's
YouTube?
on
Oh,
YouTube.
okay,
Yeah,
okay, cool.
unless you're in Canada and have access to one of like the ways that TELUS is distributing it, in which case you can watch all 8 episodes now, and I've watched the first 4. So yeah, and I knowing that after that it's going to start to get into season 3 and whatnot, but yeah, yeah, man. It's a great show. The documentary is phenomenal. I and I think that everybody should check it out and check out Perfect 10. Listen to me and MC go on and on about it and love it. I mean, here I've like talked at least 15 minutes on this episode of Force Perspective. So I yeah, well, let's cut it off there and get into actual Star Wars. But yeah, go check out Perfect 10. Check out the backlog of episodes as well. I unfortunately the only time we've talked Star Wars specifically is a Patreon exclusive, but you can go to patreon.com/thunderquack and get that. I am in the process because Patreon just launched a feature where you can actually sell episodes a la carte. So you don't have to do the
That's
subscription.
cool.
You can just purchase an individual exclusive episode. I haven't had the opportunity yet to go through and set up every episode, because I really need to go through Patreon and just kind of clean it up in general. But because they've made so many changes in the last year of like new features and stuff that like obviously I wasn't accounting for, over the last 5 years as we've done all of these podcasts. But I am going to go in and I am going to make all of those episodes available a la carte, and so you'll be able to get that episode. But here's the deal: I'm gonna make them $5 each. Okay, it's $5 a month for Patreon. If you just sign up, you get access to all of them. So
That makes sense, though. I personally don't like to do things that make sense.
yeah, I hear you on that one. Like, I understand that you don't like to do that.
I don't.
But yeah, if you go, this is the pro tip. If you go to our Patreon and you sign up for the year, if you do the annual, you get a discount. It actually is cheaper, and so then you're signed up for the year, and you have access to the backlog of all of the previous exclusives. You'll have access to the next 12 months of exclusive episodes that we do, and you get early access to things. So you get this as soon as it's ready, and you'll get, I think it's I think it's worth it. I think it's worth $5.
That
But
sounds pretty good, man.
yeah, I actually will, like, before I publish this episode, I will make sure that Perfect 10 episode about Star Wars with Amanda and I talking Star Wars is available for individual purchase. So so yeah, go do that and listen to the rest of Perfect 10 and be excited for the rest of this season. Joe, you and I are going to be doing an episode in November about Pokemon Red and Blue.
I am so
And
excited for that one, man.
yeah, it's going to be awesome.
I am also one of the people who I'm pretty sure Perfect 10 is my favorite one to do.
I mean, it makes
it's me
sense.
too.
It's literally just like, hey, what do you love? Okay, come
Yeah.
talk to me about it for an hour or two. And there's no real structure to it, right? Like so there's not. I don't feel like I'm asking my friends to do a lot of work with that one. You don't have to like go watch something that you don't already want to watch, right? It's not a random episode of Mandalorian that may or may not be awesome, right? Yeah, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. But more people need to listen to it. That's the thing. Awesome. Let's talk about our favorite original trilogy characters. Joe, I'm gonna kick it off. I'm gonna kick it off with my number 3. We're gonna go 3, 2, 1 with this for our favorite original trilogy characters. And listen, everybody, we've already discussed these, so we're not like surprising one another. But yeah, so our lists are kind of reflective of that fact. I'm gonna surprise some people, I think, with this one, because
I was surprised.
I think the character that everybody expects me to have on this list, he's not going to be on this list. But
Kanan.
yeah, yeah, I'm going to start at number 3 with Princess Leia Organa. And the reason for that is because Leia is like the archetype, right? Like Leia is that as we went back and forth on this and we were kind of talking about characters, and I was going like, okay, original trilogy characters, the ones that showed up in the 3 movies. We're not talking about like expanded universe background guy number 6 that has like a, nobody's gonna be talking about Davin Felth here. We're not getting into Tales of the anything in this. Like, we're talking about the original trilogy characters. And when I sort of like winnow it down like that and like keep myself focused on it, and I look at that cast of characters, Leia has to be on my list. Like, she has to be on my list, because every female hero that has come since, and every major like reimagining of a character, of a female character since 1977 has been done in the shadow of this character and this performance by Carrie Fisher. Like, I yeah, Leia is the original strong female character, right? And I think that one of the great things about her as a character, especially by the end of Return of the Jedi, is that she is not simply a male character with boobs, right? There is a fair amount of objectification. There is a fair amount of sexualization of the character, but we are talking about a character that was written, from the mid 1970s until the mid 80s, and we are talking about like the prototypical, as I said, like strong female character. So there's a lot of foundational stuff in here, but there's also still a lot of like problematic stuff with Leia. But I think that we have, as a fandom, reclaimed a lot of that stuff and grown past it. The fact that we no longer refer to it as, slave Leia, but she is Hut Slayer Leia, right? Like that sort of reframing, recontextualization, I think is a great thing that the fandom is able to do. And allow something that is regressive to become progressive, right?
Mhm.
Like it's sort of like taking it back. And specifically I think, I mean, the reason why we have Hut Slayer Leia as a moniker now is because of the women in the fandom, right?
Yeah.
um and to me, especially since 2020, since I kicked that Raylo Hornet's nest, and then was one of two things happens when you get stung repeatedly by a venomous insect, right? You die from anaphylactic shock, or you become completely immune to the venom, because you've been so overloaded with it that it becomes part of your bloodstream. And thankfully, the latter is what happened to me. And I was fully converted, thanks to awesome women in the Star Wars fandom, like Danny, Ty, and MC, and Missy later, who have now become like some of my best friends on the internet. All of whom are on Perfect 10. Like literally this upcoming season, all four of those women will be on Perfect 10, and I am looking so forward to recording episodes with them. And they've been on this podcast, and actually, maybe MC hasn't been on this one yet. Has Missy been on this one yet? I don't know, but yeah, women in Star Wars have they have evolved my perception of Star Wars, my experience with it, to such an incredible degree. That, like, I don't know, to be honest, like around the end of the sequel trilogy, I was feeling a little less than enamored with Star Wars, right? Like Resistance wasn't really doing it for me, although I know a lot of people really love that show. It just never really connected for me. The comics had been, in general, a disappointment. You think back then, about the video games, and we're mostly talking about Battlefront at that point, which I'm not a fan of the way that those games play. We hadn't, I don't know, had we gotten, no, we hadn't even gotten Fallen Order yet, right? That's 2021. I think,
Yeah,
right?
maybe.
I'm pretty sure it's a post-pandemic game, but or like sort of the tail end of the pandemic, but
Let's see. Now I must know.
it's certainly not before Rise of Skywalker, right? Like it's definitely a game that came after Rise of Skywalker. So like I look at it and
This is
it's like,
gonna
man,
surprise you, sir. November 14th, 2019.
oh man, so it's like right in that zone, hey? So Fallen Order was probably the only thing at that point that I was really like over the moon about. Because like Mando I loved from the
Mhm.
get-go, but that first season is very like just kind of there, right? Especially like when I look back at it, it's like, oh yeah, it was pretty cool, it was pretty fun. But it didn't really like, you know, knock my socks off entirely. Rise of Skywalker was a massive disappointment, right? But yeah, like I had kind of like put Star Wars aside for a minute, and then in the attempt to try and reconcile some of Tross, um found What the Force, and then by virtue of that sort of started seeing more of the Raylo side of Twitter, and then interacted with it foolishly, and got my comeuppance, and then through that process, yeah, like made all of these incredible friendships, um and evolved my perspective on Star Wars, and really like started to look at it from new and different angles. And so I think like in that process, I have a much deeper appreciation for Leia as a character, and that's why I think in 2024 I'm able to look at it and really like objectively go, okay, like who are my favorite characters from the OT, who are the best characters from the OT, and so like Leia has to be on that list for me, by virtue of the fact that she is literally the only woman. um but I mean, not literally, obviously, Mon Mothma is also there. But that's pretty much it.
Yeah, clearly ton of character development on that Mon Mothma.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, I mean, okay, I know we're talking OT. I love her in Andor. She's so
Oh yeah.
awesome in
Listen,
Andor.
Mon Mothma in the last 10 years has
Yeah,
become a standout Star Wars character,
yeah.
in particular because of Andor, but also because of Star Wars Rebels
Mm.
and some of the other content that Mon Mothma has shown up in, because she's shown up in a lot of stuff. But yeah, it's a at the time of the original trilogy, like if we're keeping it within that context, it's really just Leia, right?
Mm.
Um, and she carries it. She carries it. She carries everything that we need about, femininity, the goddess, and all of that stuff that we need in Star Wars. It's all contained in that character. And I'll tell you, like, my appreciation for Carrie Fisher, I since the sequel trilogy sort of started, like since The Force Awakens, and she started talking even more about Star Wars, and because of press and whatever, and then to lose her right in the lead up to the Last Jedi. My appreciation for Carrie Fisher is like as high as it could possibly be. Um, I and it breaks my heart every time I think about how
Mm.
Rise of Skywalker was affected by her death, and how we will never get more. And I the biggest thing that breaks my heart when I think about it um is that Carrie never got to see Vivian Lyra Blair play Leia in the Obi-Wan series, because I think
Mm.
that the things that she would have had to say about that performance and that portrayal of Leia, and what that does, and how that reinforces everything in the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. I think that Carrie would have really gotten a kick out of it,
Yeah.
and would have had a lot of really
Mm.
really awesome insight and awesome things to say. And the two of them together, like at
Oh, they
Celebration
would
and
have
stuff,
been awesome together.
yeah, it would have
That was
just broken
great.
the internet, right? So like it's one of those things where it's like it just wasn't meant to be. But
Mm.
but when I think about it, it's one of those like sort of melancholy things, right? Of
Sure.
like, man, what we could have had. But I at the same time, sometimes I'm also a little bit grateful that Carrie's not around to see what's happening in the fandom these days,
Mm.
and the nonsense. But you know, I yeah, part of me is like, that's when it went downhill. Like that's when it really started to get out of control. And I think when, like, I don't know, I wish that Carrie could just descend from the clouds and slap a few people at Disney at the moment and say, like, what are you, like, who are you making these for? Or like, are you making these for society? Are you making these for the fans? Are you making these for these whiny crybabies? Like, who are you making these shows for? Because it feels like right now, like, they're like, the decisions are, we got to make stuff for the people who are bitching about things online. And I don't know, I don't think that Carrie would allow that nonsense to continue. I think she'd have a lot to say about it. So yeah, Leia, both like in within the films, as well as the larger sort of metatextual narrative of Star Wars, I think is such a vastly important character that she can't be overlooked, and I had to include her on the list. Also, like, not to be too crass about it, but like, Carrie would talk about this. It's like we all had that poster. we all,
I had it.
like us, those of us who appreciate a pretty lady that tells us what to do. Um, we all had a certain you know affinity for the
Mm.
character. And I think, like, it's very formative, I think, for a lot of youth, especially our generation, right? Our generation, sort of, and like the one before us.
Do you
So
think that's why, that same crowd who is always upset about the things that they're upset about is also upset about, like, slave Leia merchandise and all that stuff kind of going away?
Yeah.
Is it because it was such like a formative thing for many of us that
Absolutely.
they just
Absolutely. I
want
mean,
it back, and
I
because of that,
think,
they just don't see
yeah.
what's wrong with it?
My two favorite quotes from Star Wars, and they're the ones that that repeat in my brain the most often, come from Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, right? From Obi-Wan, it's many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view, right? And then Qui-Gon reinforces that in the Phantom Menace. We talked a lot about this when we talked about the Phantom Menace. Your focus determines your reality,
Yeah.
right? And I think that if you take those two things, those are they are the your focus determines your reality is sort of like the preamble, and then the nonsense that we deal with these people is the thing, and then sort of the you know, post game conversation is the many of the truths we cling to, right?
Mm.
Like you like anything that we engage with, any of the discourse that happens online, I try and put it into those lenses. I try and look at it from that, like, what were these people, what are these people carrying into the experience, and then after the fact, sort of looking at it and going like, why is their perspective as skewed as it is,
Mm.
right? And I look at that specifically about Leia. I think that we see a lot of what we want to see in these shows, and that's where these shows, these movies, these stories, right? Like just in stories in general, I think that we project a lot. I think like the less introspection you've done, the less solo work you've done on yourself, on like the way that you interact with the world, with media, with storytelling, with like and how it influences your own like personal narrative and the way that you think about yourself, and the decisions that you make, because it does, right? The less that you think about that stuff, the more prone you are to not see these stories as they are, but as you would like them to be. And so that's where we get the "not my Luke Skywalker" and the woke mind virus nonsense. That's where that's coming from, is these individuals who have not done that internal work. They haven't really like reconciled their relationship to a children's franchise, and so their opinions and perspectives on it are not particularly evolved, right? And then when they are, because they haven't done that work, that internal work, when they are confronted, they double down, they get
Okay.
defensive, as opposed to anybody who I think has done that work. You don't get defensive, you I hope get curious, right? Like
Mm.
that's a Ted Lasso thing, right? um and so like that to me is sort of, it's very much embodied in that, in the slave Leia versus Hut Slayer Leia thing, right? Also, I mean, like, also like the let's call it a controversy, although I think the average human being does not give a single fuck, but the slave one, and then now it's just either bounty hunter ship, or Boba Fett's
Fire
starship,
spray,
or
or
the
yeah.
fire spray, right? We don't call it slave one anymore officially, right? Like, to me, if that bugs you, then like you're really focused on the wrong stuff with Star Wars. Like, if that stops you from being able to enjoy Star Wars, because I'll call it slave one, like, it doesn't matter to me. I think that that's actually, it's one of those like and I don't want to speak for black people because I'm obviously not a black person.
Since
But
when?
well, yeah, my understanding from having done a lot of listening, and this is me not stating my opinion, but trying to um, I like amplify the voices that I hear and that I listen to. Um, the thing of like, oh, we're not going to call it slave one anymore because that word is a bad word, right? um that is like the performative nonsense that anybody
Mm.
who supports Black Lives Matter is actually like, I wouldn't say they're against, but my understanding is that it's like, thanks, but that's really not what we're talking about,
Yeah.
right?
There are a
So
lot of problems. This
yeah,
isn't really the
yeah,
biggest one to
it's
focus on.
I don't think that removing the Dungeons and Dragons episode of Community because of a joke about blackface is doing anything to further the conversation about police brutality, or like the way that minorities, marginalized communities, specifically Black communities, are treated in Western society, and again specifically the United States, and their relationship with institutions of authority, with a lot of power, right? Like changing it to slave one is like, we're not going to solve racism by no longer calling it slave one. um and the word slave has connotations beyond, you know uh, uh, American history and Black people. So like, as a Jew, I mean, like, the Jewish people were enslaved time and time and time and time again. It's kind of part of the culture, that Jewish people carry, that that identity and that trauma, all the way into 2024. So I look at it from that perspective as a Jewish person and go like, it doesn't bother me that it's called slave one. It also like slave Leia, saying slave Leia was not really a thing that bothered me. I understand the evolution of that. I understand the evolution of that into Huttslayer. It has less to do with, I think, the racial connotation of the word slave in America, and much more to do with misogyny and the subjugation of the only female character in Star Wars
Mm.
at that
Right.
point, right? Like, and so the term Hut Slayer is a thing where it's like, yeah, no, that's about Leia owning her agency, and
Mm.
she doesn't need Luke to come and rescue her, or Han, or any of them. As a matter of fact, most of the time she's the one rescuing them, right? I I All of that tied into the fact, like, this is why Leia is on my list. And I'll say, like, the Obi-Wan Kenobi series is a big contributor to me being able to look at that character with that lens, and go like, no, this character is like so much more important than I think she's given credit for. Um, and and should have been even more central in the sequel trilogy. And I would really love to eventually get some sort of official, uh you know content, story, comic book, something, from George's uh story treatment for the sequel trilogy, because he had done a story treatment for the three movies, and it was going to be about, like, sort of recontextualizing that actually Leia was the chosen one the whole time, that it wasn't Anakin, it wasn't Luke, but it was Leia, and that she's the one who had the ability to bring balance to the Force and peace to the galaxy, not by swinging around a lightsaber, but through other means, right? Which would have been a really great story to tell. The the general audience, I don't think, would have received it as it was intended, and it would have been yet another thing that George Lucas would have been just absolutely roasted for. But from my point of view, I think that would have been a really great way to tell another story in the Skywalker saga. Um, yeah, I love Leia. She's the best.
She's awesome.
What's your number three?
I think he's my favorite astromech. Pretty sure he's yours. Pretty sure he's everybody's. I mean, maybe not true. A lot of people like Chopper.
Yeah,
But come on, man, R2D2. He's like the guy.
yeah,
He's got everybody's back. There's so many really like cool things that when you kind of sit back and think about, like, it's crazy how well they work. Like, so this character was, I think the sound design was Ben Burt even in the OT, right? Am I remembering that
Yes.
correctly?
Yeah.
Or was he?
Yeah.
Okay. So like to think that these dudes put together this whole little robot language of beeps and whistles and, you know, with all this character, with all this personality, no matter what R2D2's saying, even though you don't understand him, you still understand him. Like the mood, the intensity, like just like he's like a perfect example of like the show don't tell kind of thing, where like even though you're just like listening, like the sound is telling the story even though it's not actually spoon
Yeah.
feeding you, you know, exposition or anything like that. And it's just like a really cool thing to see other characters interact with him, and that's kind of how you get your information. Like, oh yes, you know, uh, I'm blanking right now because I'm like trying to make a point, of course. But like, I don't know, man. R2 is always just the guy who has everybody's back, is always totally prepared for everybody's screw up, is just like he's just a guy. He's a little guy, right? He's the Star Wars little guy. He's the first little guy
Yeah.
in Star Wars.
Yeah.
And man, like I don't know. Like I love everything about him. His cool little design, his you know, his attitude. I love that it's clear that throughout every single Star Wars movie, R2D2 swearing at everybody.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Um yeah, he's just got he's like the reliable best friend for everybody, for every character. I love him.
Yeah. I mean, R2 is the main character in Star Wars, right? I think you know, it's kind of academic at this point when we talk about him in that way. And it's funny to me. It'll always be funny to me when people will say along the lines of like, well, who's even the main character in Star Wars? A lot of the time it comes up with the Phantom Menace, right? And it's like, well, R2D2 is the main character. R2 and that to me, I think I may have even said this when we talked about the Phantom Menace, but I know I've said it before on a podcast. That to me is the greatest failing of the sequel trilogy is J.J. Abrams' failure to understand that they one of the ways that you get around what ended up happening culturally with the conversation about Luke Skywalker is by having that touchstone, right? Because if we're always looking at everything from the perspective of R2, like if R2 is always there, if he is persistent, even though, you know, like we go off in different, R2 obviously isn't there for every single part of the story. He's not there for the stuff that happens on the Death Star. He's not there for, like, I'm talking about, like, you know, when it's Vader and Tarkin or whatever, right? Like he's not there for a lot of stuff, but he is like the observer of the greater story, right? And I think that with that, like if you had that in the sequel trilogy, that it would have gone a long way to us. um Not that it was a problem, I think, for you and I. We accepted Ray right off the bat, right? Like it's like, well, you're telling us that Ray's the main character, Ray's the main character, right? That's not a big deal. But like I think if instead of BB-8, as much as I love BB-8, if instead of BB-8 it's R2, you would be instantly even more enamored with Ray if she was rescuing R2D2, right? And then we would go, oh, she's the new Luke Skywalker, right? Like it would just like these things would just like they would click a little bit better for
Hmm.
me if it was R2, because like that's the power of that character. That's the power of like he is a silent protagonist in the same vein as, you know, traditionally Link, or, you know, even Super Mario, Mr. Chef from the video game Ring series, Master Chief from Halo, if anybody doesn't get my joke, my sense of humor on that one. The reason why those video game characters are crafted in the way that they are is because the silent protagonist, the silent hero allows us to project ourselves into that character. And so I think there's a huge amount of that in R2 in the original trilogy of like, and it's why everybody loves R2, right? It's why everybody loves BB-8. It's why everybody loves Chopper. It's why if your show doesn't have that character, if your movie doesn't have that character, then it's actually missing a very key component of Star Wars. And I don't mean to say that it has to have actually like R2D2, right? But it has to have a character of that archetype. And we do joke about it a lot, the little guy thing on this show. He is the original little guy. The like if we look at all of the stories that have been super successful with Star Wars, there is a little guy and he is mostly silent, and we are projecting a lot of our own feelings onto the things that he's saying to the other characters. And like in Mando, it's Grogu, right? Like that character being there is this blank slate that we can all, you know, participate in, right? I it's such an important part of Star Wars, I think, especially for kids. R2 being smaller than everybody else, seemingly powerless, right? Like what's this little droid gonna do? And yet he's the one who starts the adventure. He's the one who gets Luke to leave the farm, right? He's the one that shuts off the trash compactor and saves everybody. In Empire, he's he's the first one to clock Yoda, right? Like, and obviously now we have like other context and stuff like that, so we know that he knows. And how much do we know that Yoda knows that he knows? Whatever. But like in the original context of the way that that movie was made, like R2, if you pay attention, R2 clocks that Yoda is not what he appears to be right from the outset, right? And that's why he's like no, like don't take the lamp. Like, what are you doing? Like, tell him that you're Yoda, sort of thing. Like, I and R2's the one that figures out that the hyperdrive's been deactivated by Vader, right? um yeah, like he's the only one that knows the full plan when Luke goes into Jabba's palace. No, everybody else has parts of the plan, right? Like I concepts of a plan to
oh, you're
topical.
fresh.
I but R2 is the only one that Luke keeps fully apprised of what's about to go down, right? Yeah, R2 is the dude. Like, R2 is the guy. And when R2 gets taken out, we feel it, right? Like,
I take it personally.
yeah. When he gets blasted by Vader, it's like, oh no, like, and 3PO, if any, I'd gladly donate any of my gears. And it's like, we all feel that way, 3PO. Like we're all right there. We've just been on this adventure, and R2 is the reason why, and so we're all right there with him. Yeah, man, R2D2 is the original little guy, and the little guy is to me, the more that I think about it, the more that we talk about it on the podcast, the more I examine it as a lens for Star Wars. Like, the little guy is really like the nucleus of Star Wars to a very literal degree with the character of R2D2. And so, like, the sequel trilogy has BB-8, and therefore it is fulfilling that. I think my argument is just, if BB-8 were R2, that a lot of the hiccups of people like adopting the sequel trilogy characters, the new characters, I think would have been avoided. I think that George very smartly inserted R2 into the prequels in the way that he did, and without a lot of explanation, right? Like the way that R2 transitions from being Padme's droid to being Anakin's droid is like, and granted, it's in the Clone Wars micro series, right? Like, she points at R2, she points at Anakin, she's like, you're going to fight the war, you're going to need R2 by your side, and we all understand that as fans. But I think for the casual audience, for the general viewer, like they don't care. They don't even question it, right? Like R2 is with Anakin because R2 is with Anakin. Like that's where, because it's where he belongs, in the thick of it, in the action, you know, lighting super battle droids on fire with oil. Like that's like R2D2's got to be there. He needs to be central. He needs to be central. And he is sidelined more than anybody in the sequel trilogy, and I think it's to the sequel trilogy's detriment. Like it's not about is the sequel trilogy good or bad. It's about how much better would it have been if R2 was a more central character. And I really think that that's one of the key things that JJ missed in his analysis in creating that and establishing that time frame for the story. It's one of those things that I hope that with new stories, with the new Rey movie, maybe they can fix it. Because I think one of the things that ends up happening, I mean, with Luke and Leia gone, where does that leave R2 and 3PO, right? um and BB-8 belongs to Poe, even though we see BB-8 at the end of Rise with Rey. I don't know. To me, it's like, yeah, I don't know. Ryan Johnson had it right at the end of the Last Jedi, when BB-8 rolls out of the ship and Poe runs up, like he doesn't care if he's about to get shot. He runs up and he embraces BB-8 and gives him belly scratches, which is one of the best parts of The Last Jedi, a movie that I absolutely love. But that characterization, the way that Oscar Isaac just like he gives his droid belly scratches, yeah, it's like that should have been like, okay, yeah, BB-8's back with Poe, which is where he actually belongs. He went on an adventure with Rey, and Finn, but like mostly with Rey, and then he went on an adventure with Finn and Rose, right? And now he's back with Poe, and he should have been with Poe for the entirety of Rise. But anyways, and R2 I think should be with Rey, and that would make more sense. But I don't know. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe
I think you know what you're talking about.
maybe I'm crazy, but yeah, R2D2 is great. Should we move on to our number twos?
Yeah, do it.
So speaking of the connection between R2D2 and the protagonists of Star Wars, I'll transition very smoothly over to my number two, which is Luke Skywalker. I think that by saying that, and by saying the thing that I said at the beginning of like the guy you think is going to be on this list isn't going to be on this list. He's in the top 5, but not in the top 3. People are going to now know who my number 1 is going to be. But Luke was my first cipher in Star Wars. When I first got into Star Wars, when I was 10, Canadian, so I want to say the 5th grade, but when I was 10, Luke was the character that I identified with the most, and that I was sort of, self-inserting into. That Halloween, I grabbed a black turtleneck, black jeans, a black belt, a black vest that I pulled out of the costume box. And I don't know if people will understand this reference. I think some of you will. There was, back in the day, if you are an elder millennial, I think that you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Even if you're like one of the younger Gen Xers, I think you might know what I'm talking about. There was a Fisher Price musical instrument, and I don't remember exactly what it was called, but it was like, it came in this little box, and it was a bunch of pieces. It was like a little curved tube, like a macaroni elbow sort of shape. A long white one that had the finger holes like a flute, right? Like the end of a trumpet, whatever you call it, like what the flared end of a trumpet, right? And then like the mouthpiece and a couple of other pieces. And one of the pieces was also like it was 2 tubes with sort of like a connector piece and a circle in the middle of it. And then a smaller, just straight tube. So that was, I think, the entirety of the set. And I think there might have been a little like one of those things, like on a not a kazoo, what's the, like a slide whistle, right?
Mhm.
And you could put those things together and make different musical instruments, right? That was the idea, is that you would make these different musical instruments, like a sousaphone, right? Like Dr. Seuss. The sousaphone's an actual instrument, but like named after Dr. Seuss, and the nature of like Dr. Seuss, having like these ridiculous verbose instruments with all of these tubes going all over the place. So like that was the idea of this toy. I took this toy and I took the white long tube with the finger holes, and I was like, that is a lightsaber hilt. Obviously, it has buttons on it. It is exactly the size for my hand that a lightsaber would be, and I can imagine a blade coming out of it. And then I took the curved. There was, I guess there were two curved pieces, because there was the full elbow, and then there was like the cord, like it was like a half circle, right? That elbow piece that I was talking about, and then there was one that was a quarter of a circle, right? Like just the quarter, I don't know, like that top quadrant sort of thing. I took that. I took the piece with the two tubes. I put that in one side, and then I put one of the short ones in the other, and that was a blaster, right? That was like a DL-44 blaster, because it was the curved handle, the magazine, right? Like where you would put the, as we know, canonically, the power pack into your blaster, and then the muzzle, right? So that was my blaster. It was all comprised of yellow Fisher Price musical instrument pieces, and like I said, the lightsaber was a piece of white plastic. But in my mind, it made perfect sense, right? Because I was 10, so I'm like, yeah, and that was my Luke Skywalker Halloween costume from Return of the Jedi. Now, he doesn't have the blaster in Return of the Jedi, but that didn't stop me,
Yeah,
because
it
I was
doesn't
like,
matter.
no,
He used one in Empire.
yeah, I need to have the blaster. I was doing back then what I do to this day, which is I was taking my favorite things about character designs, and I was just mashing them up and
Yeah,
making my own design.
yeah. Why not?
Because this was also, I don't know, actually, I don't, maybe we hadn't seen anything from Shadows of the Empire yet. We would very soon after that. That was like, I think that was the next year, 96, right? um I but yeah, I very much like that, where it's like, because the Shadows of the Empire Luke is like this great transition. When you look at the character design now, it's like he's got the blaster on his belt, he's also got a lightsaber, right? Because he builds
And
the
a
green lightsaber,
and a fishing vest.
and he's got the tan vest, which is like it's the color of the Bespin fatigues, right? But then he's wearing all black,
Mm.
like he does in Return of the Jedi. So it's like this great transitional design. I love that design to this day. Like,
So do I, man.
it's so cheesy, but at the same time, I'm like, yeah, man, that's great.
Are you aware that? I mean, this is barely related, but uh, so Hasbro announced a Prince Shizor Black
Yes.
Series figure, and on the listing on the Amazon page, there it's because when you look at the Prince Shizor packaging, it's #1 for Shadows of the Empire. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, they're
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
do other stuff, and on the Amazon listing, it also says something like, keep an eye out for other characters from Shadow of the Empire, including Dash Rendar, Princess Leia, and Luke Skywalker. If we're gonna finally get a Hasbro Luke Skywalker with the fishing vest, I'm gonna flip out. I can't
Oh my
wait.
god, dude. Yeah, yeah, because for those who don't know, back in 96, 97, when those were coming out, I I Luke was in the line. He was in the Power of
Mm,
the Force Shadows of the Empire line. But there's a moment in the story where he pulls the same malarkey that he pulled in A New Hope. He steals a he steals what Shizor has these guards. They're
yeah.
kind of like Crimson Guards, but they also kind of look like Mandalorians. It's a whole thing. Shadows of the Empire is very derivative, but it's still great. But it's very derivative. And he takes that armor in order to like infiltrate the Skyhook, right? And so that's the action figure, is one of those guards, because it's a great design. It's a great design, because um the Hildebrands are the ones. Did they design all of the way that stuff looked?
No, I
It's
don't think they actually designed everything.
okay.
I'm pretty sure
I
that
would
stuff was already
love
designed.
some sort of like an official like you know we have like all the making of Star Wars things.
Oh,
There's
dude, this exists already. There's a book called Secrets to Shadows of the Empire, and it's
Oh,
awesome.
really?
Yeah, it's
Okay, awesome.
awesome.
Maybe I need to track that down because like I would love to get the behind the scenes and
Yeah.
like know exactly what the
Oh,
process
dude.
was.
Yeah, you got to read it. This is
Okay.
exactly what you're asking for.
Yeah, because that was the very first time that Lucasfilm did the transmedia uh, experiment, right?
Mm.
Of like, oh, we're gonna release a book, a comic, a video game, action figures, micro machines, all of it, and it's a soundtrack. It's basically a movie release without a movie is how they referred to it back then. And yeah, so Shadows is one of those things where it's like, yeah, I would love to know how they went about that process back then, because now there's a whole machine to do it, right? So it's not as interesting for like the
Mm.
High Republic, right? It's like, oh no, they just put together a like they just broke people off of the story group and grabbed a bunch of creatives and went, okay, here you go, right? Because now it's like a well-oiled machine now, like they or you know it's a partly oiled machine at least. um there's still a lot of places where like somebody tells a story and it conflicts with another thing and it's a whole nightmare, but um they're at least a lot more conscious about it and it's part of the process nowadays.
Mm.
Whereas back then it was like a completely new thing. But yeah, I would love to get more on that. But that era, like that time period when I first got into Star Wars, um and really like I would say was sort of like fixated on Return of the Jedi specifically. And if you think about that, sort of think about the other characters in Return of the Jedi versus Luke Skywalker, and it's like, well, yeah, you're gonna gravitate towards Luke, I think, as your favorite character. The green lightsaber, the all black, I yeah, just everything about him from that perspective. This is where like with modern discourse, the not my Luke Skywalker stuff and all of that, it's like I have a lot of empathy for the fans who are trapped there, right?
Mm.
um and that can't get past that point. Joe, I would even say that you're not fully there, but I think that like you and I still have some work to do to get you past that.
Oh.
And we will, but I there are people who are I think it very much like influences you, Joe. Like I think that your perspective on Luke Skywalker and your emotional attachment to who that character was
Mm.
back in that era, the same as my emotional attachment. Um, it still very much influences the way that you experience modern Star Wars. But I think that for a lot of these guys, and when I say guys, I mean men, cisgendered, predominantly white heterosexual men, they have such an attachment to that vision of Luke Skywalker that they have from Return of the Jedi, that they had as a child. Their perspective that they had of Luke Skywalker and Return of the Jedi as a child, right? Um, they're unable to see Luke as a rounded character, as something even more fleshed out and interesting than that very two-dimensional superhero that they've built him into. And the Force Unleashed did not do a lot of help in this respect, in setting expectations for what a Jedi would look like after Return of the Jedi. I and that to me is like it's just one of the things that drives me nuts about Star Wars fandom today, is that like if the second that somebody is like, man, why can't they make another Force Unleashed, and it's like, because we've moved on past that. They did make another Force Unleashed. It's called Fallen Order, and it's a much more evolved, much more sophisticated version of that story. Like quite literally, I look at Fallen Order and Survivor as like spiritual successors to the Force Unleashed. That even those games take force powers and Jedi and turn them into superhero things, because they're video games. It's going to happen, right? But yeah, like that whole aspect of it, I think it skews the relationship with Luke Skywalker to such a degree. um it creates this expectation, this completely unreasonable expectation based on the rest of the text, right? If we're going based on what is in the films, the idea that Luke would be this, like swashbuckling superhero by the time of the sequel trilogy is just, to me, um it's a disservice to the complexity of the character of Luke Skywalker. Because when you look at the original trilogy and the journey that he goes through and the ups and downs and ultimately the sacrifice he's willing to make at the end of Return of the Jedi, I think that to then like freeze him in that moment in carbonite, as it were, as that character in perpetuity, and never let him grow and evolve beyond that, or even better, regress, I it's such a disservice to the journey of that character. So yeah, I mean, like you and I in the future have a conversation about Luke Skywalker that we need to have on this podcast that is like possibly more than one episode. But I'll cut myself off there in terms of Luke and my relationship to him and all of that. But I like the first Power of the Force action figure that I ever got was Luke. It was X-wing Luke and R2D2, with the intention of getting the X-wing, which I never got. I did have a Naboo starfighter. I've talked about that on podcast before. I had an N1 and I put him in the N1. And then when Rogue Leader came out, and that became like a part of that story, not that it's Wedge that's in it, but like you can't, if you go off the beaten path, there is like a storyline that unlocks the N1 starfighter. I remember doing that and being like, man, this is the best thing ever, because it's just like when I was playing with my action figures. But yeah, like I love Luke to this day. But as an adult, as a man entering midlife crisis era, my relationship to Luke Skywalker, I think, is very different than it was when I was 10 years old. And that is one of the things that I love the most about Star Wars, is that as we age, as we grow, as we evolve as human beings, there are new things to go back and explore. There are ways to look at characters that you've never looked at before. And yeah, I mean, like Luke being the central character of the original trilogy, I think he like exemplifies that, right? So there we go. Luke Skywalker, my number 2. Who's your
That's a
number
good
2?
one, man. My number 2 is Han Solo.
Han Solo.
Han Solo. Han. Depending on who you ask, it's Han or Han.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I mean, I feel like there's only so much you can say about Han that has not already been said, right? He's scoundrel, heart of gold. Something that I've come to really appreciate about him later on is, I know people have very mixed opinions about him in Return of the Jedi because, the background of it is, Lucas wasn't sure if he was going to be coming back or not. Harrison Ford. And that's why he was chosen a Carbonite in the first place. And it was possible that Lando was going to take his place, whatever. So, like, Han's role in there was kind of, wasn't really a ton for him to do. So, it just kind of went the way that it went. And Harrison Ford thinks that Han should have died, whatever. But, like, I actually really like a lot of the choices that Harrison Ford made. And I guess George, too, in the writing. Because one of my favorite Han Solo moments ever is when he's, like, a dick to Leia because he is getting frustrated and jealous, and then immediately stops and collects himself and very sincerely and humbly apologizes to her.
Yeah.
It's just not something that I felt like growing up I saw a lot of, like, cool guy bad boys doing, and it was just like one of those things where it kind of informed the kind of guy that I wanted to grow up to be, where when you make a mistake, you can own it and you can be sincere and you don't have to be a jerk about it. You don't have to double down about it, because so many of these, like, cool guy, badasses are always jerks and, double down, and they're always continued jerks. But meanwhile, the the love interest would still forgive him anyway because, oh, that's just the way he is. I like that Han Solo was in touch with his feelings, and I like that that's something that they carried into Solo, the Solo film. Like,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Like, I don't know, man. Like, Han Solo is just like a very, he's the guy you want to be more like in a lot of ways. Later on, because like he kind of he also has some problematic things. Like, he does do a lot of negging in Empire Strikes Back, and while Empire Strikes Back is my favorite film, I don't really love the dynamic between Han and Leia in that movie because you know I don't love that she tells him no and he ignores that anyway. But other than that, uh, there's a lot of good to Han, man. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff that is a part of Han's character. I like that he makes mistakes and he makes the wrong
Mm,
choice and he turns around and does the right thing instead. I think that's important to see our heroes doing because everybody makes mistakes, right?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, like Han Han is such a he's such a basic answer.
I know
I
he is.
I but he's also not, because it all depends on how you're approaching it, right?
Mm.
Um I guess this is the point where I'll say that Han is my number one, right? And so we can have this conversation in tandem a little bit, because for me, Han has always been my number one favorite character. Not always, I guess, because I just said that Luke was at the beginning, but like from a certain point, it becomes Han, and that's never really changed. And then there was a certain point in my life where I had to realize, like, oh, Han's not my favorite Star Wars character, because I have much more attachment to Obi-Wan. And Han is now like not even on the top five when it comes to my favorite Star Wars characters. But if we are, again, we are narrowing our perspective to the original trilogy, Han Solo is my favorite character in the original trilogy, and a big part of that is exactly what you just talked about, in the fact that, like, on the surface he is very easy to understand. He's the rogue, he's the scoundrel, right? Like,
Mm.
he gets to do the things that we all wish that we could do. He reacts to things in the way that we all wish that we could, right? He shoots first, stuff like that, right? He gets the girl. He is great at everything that he does. um I But then, as you get older, as you look at the character more, as you sort of take in more and more of what, you know makes a great Star Wars character, and what this archetype is, I you learn more and more that, like, oh, Han actually has no idea what he's doing, right? Like, he's totally out of his depth all the time. And the way that he interacts with Leia and Luke, um one of my favorite things is in Return of the Jedi, when he comes out of the carbonite and the other characters have had, um, literally by virtue of his storyline, they have had these moments where they've had to grow up, right? Because the older brother has been absent. So, um, like sort of, Han sort of had occupied that position of, like, kind of the one that everybody was looking to. He's the one who saves the day in A New Hope, right? Like, he's really, like, sort of the main mover in Empire. It's like him and Vader are the ones propelling that story.
Mm.
Because if not for the actions of those two characters, Luke just stays on Dagobah. Luke
Right.
goes to Dagobah to train, and he just stays on Dagobah and he trains, and eventually he leaves to go fight Vader and the Emperor. But it's Han's actions. It's Han taking them into the asteroid field, taking them to Bespin, all of that, coupled with Vader's reactions to those decisions, that really moves that story forward, right? I like You remove him from the story, so the story that happens in between Empire and Jedi, whichever version of it you want to subscribe to, whether it's Shadows of the Empire or you know, the current comics continuity or whatever. The characters are then, everybody else is then kind of directionless for a little bit, right? Like they all have to go out and sort of self actualize, and that happens in between the films. So we come back and Luke has very much evolved as a character, right? Based on what happened with him and Vader, but also based on, you know, what's happened in the intervening time period, whatever you want to consider it, years, whatever, right? And there's that great moment where they're on the skiff. Actually, I guess it starts in Jabba's palace, right? Because it's like, oh, like how are we doing? Same as, was it was say like same as usual, that bad, huh? Right? And then they're on the skiff and it's like Luke's like, oh, don't worry, I've got everything figured out. I have a plan. And Han's reaction, we read it in this certain way because we can see Luke, but Han can't see Luke yet, right? Like he hasn't seen Luke yet. He didn't see Luke deal with the Rancor. He didn't see Luke choke the Gamorreans. He also doesn't know anything about the fight with Vader, right? Like he has no context. We have so much context for Luke. So we see Luke and we're like, well, I think he does have a plan, Han. Like, yeah, actually, I think you're the one who's out of the loop right now, because it seems like Luke and Lando have kind of fucking figured this shit out. Like you don't realize this, but the guard behind you is Lando, and I'm pretty sure that's Luke's plan. Like, we're all sitting there as an audience, going like you know, "Ah, you're wrong. You're wrong, Han." But he's got that cocksure attitude that we know Han for. And I love that because it is in Return of the Jedi sort of the beginning of Han realizing that he is not Solo anymore, right? He has become a part of this family. And that Luke and Leia would risk everything. They would risk the entire rebellion, right? And again, from later stories, we know just how much that's true, just how much they risk the entire rebellion for this one guy, right? And how much Leia puts on the line, and the favors that she calls in, and all of that stuff, right, in order to rescue Han. And I think like when you look at that as an adult and you look at that storyline, you look at the way that plays out, it's very it 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 makes him so much more rounded as a character, because that movie is him having to come to terms with that he's like, because Han has always been the protagonist in his own narrative, right? And it's in Return of the Jedi that I think he makes that transition. um it starts with him being the one leading the strike team, right?
Mm.
But by the end of the Battle of Endor, Han has taken a backseat to Luke. He's taken a backseat to Leia. He's taken a backseat to the Ewoks, right? Chewie has done more in the Battle of Endor than Han has, right? But Han, I think, like, sort of figures out his place within the larger group, right? Like, Han's the idea guy. Han's the improviser. Leia makes the plan, and then when the plan goes horribly, Han's there to you know, 'cause it's like not Leia's fault, right? Like, it's just no plan survives contact with the enemy, or whatever the phrase is, right? It's like you make the plan and you plan for the plan to fail, and that's why you have a guy like Han Solo on your team, right? And so like that's like he falls into that spot, as opposed to in A New Hope and Empire, where you see him constantly struggling with other characters to be the one in the lead, right? It's like, it's A New Hope is Luke's story, but Han is constantly trying to, like, make himself the main character, right? I which is like, this is why Solo, I think, is such a great movie. I'm like unpacking this right now as we talk about it. But I think that this is one of the reasons why Solo is such a great movie, because Solo is about Han becoming the main character of his story. But then by the end of it, like, sort of, I don't know. I'm like I said, I'm unpacking this, so I'm trying to figure this out as we talk about it. I am making this up as I go along, very much in the Han Solo Indiana Jones archetype. But there's like, it doesn't really work out for him, does it? You know what I mean? Like
Right.
Han is not meant to be the protagonist. Han is always meant to be support. He is always meant to be support. But the thing that makes him great at being that support is also the thing that makes him fight against being in the background. He has this insatiable desire to be the main character, right? I It's a thing that like is passed on legacy wise in different ways to both Finn and Poe. Both of them have storylines where that's very much what's going on with them, right? The Force Awakens is very much that for Finn, and then The Last Jedi is very much that for Poe. And uh, that's why Leia is so integral in Poe learning that lesson of like, you're not the main character. Yeah, you're a leader, and leaders are leaders are not hotshots. They are not the guy that counterintuitively they're not the one at the front of the assault, right? They're actually the ones at the back, supporting everybody else, and that's the lesson that Poe has to learn, right? But it's like that's something that Han, I think, learns over the course of the original trilogy, and by the end of Return of the Jedi, that's where he's at. I that he becomes a sidekick, and I think that's one of the things you sort of touched on it. I think that's one of the things that people rub up against in Return of the Jedi, and they react to it in like, oh, my favorite character has been sidelined. That's how we always refer to it, right? They've been sidelined, and it's like, have they been sidelined, or have they actually found where they belong in the narrative, in the family, in the group, in the hierarchy, right? Um, and will they have their opportunity to shine? Absolutely, right? But listen, Anakin's the main character of the prequel trilogy. Luke is the main character of the original trilogy, and Rey is the main character of the sequel trilogy. That's reality. So the other characters, by definition, are secondary characters. Every single one of them, because our protagonist, our lead character, is that character. As much as I make the argument all the time about R2D2 being the protagonist of the saga, is like he's the protagonist in the way that, like I said, he's the silent protagonist, right? He's our the character that we're going to project onto no matter what. I think the thing about Han, and this is something that you said, is that Han is not the character that we see ourselves as. Han is the character that we would like to be.
Yeah.
Right? It's like there's a very big difference in that, right? Spider-Man is the guy that we see ourselves as. Spider-Man is the everyman. Wolverine is the dude we all wish we were, right? And that's why the two most popular characters in Marvel will always be Spider-Man and Wolverine, right? And there are other characters that have come along that like take up those mantles as well. Like I think Miss Marvel is a really great Peter Parker, like Kamala is a great character as that like Peter Parker everyman cipher that we're putting ourselves into. If you can get past the fact that she's a Muslim girl, which a lot of white men can't, but if you are again a more evolved human being, I think like you look at that character and it's like that's great. But like Luke and Han are those characters in Star Wars, right? It's and I think in the prequel trilogy, it's Anakin and Obi-Wan, obviously, right? Like I think that Anakin is the character that we all are going to relate to the most. We all feel um, at one point or another, unbalanced and frustrated with our position and our agency and all of that stuff, and so we can really relate to Anakin. And we're all whiny babies. Like all of us are whiny babies more than we are Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is like a very self-assured, self-actualized, like confident individual, right? um and like that's Luke and Han as well, right? I and I think that like when you look at the sequel trilogy, it gets a little bit weird because of how they broke up the archetypes. But that's Finn and Poe, right? Like I think that Finn very much has that everyman quality, and then Poe is the cool guy. Like Poe is the Han Solo,
Mm.
Obi-Wan Kenobi, like self-assured, self-actualized. But the great thing about those characters in all three of those trilogies is that they do actually like they aren't they see themselves that way, but they aren't actually, right? They actually have a lot to learn and a lot of room to grow. Um so yeah, like again, Han starts off as this character that is so easy to just be like, "Oh yeah, I got him pegged." But then as it goes, you're like, "No, there's more to this character. There's so much more to this character than than there is on the surface." And that's I think that people who have that surface understanding of Han Solo, they're not going to connect with Han in Solo, a Star Wars story, right? Like
Sure.
they're gonna look at that character and they're gonna go, "This isn't Han Solo," and it's like, well, yeah, it is. It's just not the Han Solo that you are familiar with. There's
Mm.
more to that character, and if you take a second, you'll see that. But those people don't want to take a second.
Mm.
They want it spoon fed to them, and they want it to be easy. They don't want the thing about all of that. And it's like there's similar stuff going on with Kylo Ren and Ben Solo, and I think a lot of people's attitudes towards that character, we and Luke in The Last Jedi, we don't want to see that weakness. We don't want to see the frailty. We don't want to see um we don't want to see the mistakes. We just want to see the hero, right? We just want to see the good part. But I mean, like this, I think this is what Christopher Nolan was getting at in The Dark Knight when he wrote the line, "You die the hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain." If a character is around for long enough, eventually they have to become a well-rounded character. You cannot have multiple movies, multiple seasons, multiple stories, legacies of characters without those characters getting into murky territory, without them, you know,
Mm.
crawling around in the mud. They have to in order for them to have longevity, right? Um, I think I really think that people miss that concept. Like they don't want to see it. Like it's a willful ignorance
Mm.
of like, no, I want my heroes to be heroes. How come men can't be men anymore? How come, you know, I want masculine blah blah blah, right? Like all of that bullshit that you hear from that specific contingent, right? That's what they're talking about. Like that's what they're really getting at is uh tangent. This ties into a thing that I think about, you know, the COVID vaccine and vaccinations in general. I believe that there are a lot of men out there who are unable to reconcile the fact that as grown ass adult men, and for good reason they can't reconcile this, they are afraid to get a needle, right? And I think that a lot of vaccine anti-vax rhetoric is a lot of justification to hide that fact. Um, and this is like similar stuff. There's a fragility to the male ego that until you can actually embrace your feminine side, you can't get past. Which is, I think, to a lot of men, counterintuitive, right? Because women are perceived as weaker, as softer, all of those things. But in reality, until you accept the feminine in your like in yourself, in your psyche as a man, until you can like reconcile and then accept that, your male ego will be sugar glass,
Mm.
right? And the smallest perceived slight will shatter it. And I think that's what we see online. I think that's so much of what we see
Yeah.
online is men who don't have that. They're so insecure because they don't have that relationship with themselves, and they aren't able to reconcile and accept and embrace. I mean, honestly, embrace it, because it's an aspect of all humans, right? Whether you want it to be or not, like it's inevitable. um and it's so funny. Han is a character who I don't know that he ever, maybe only in those final moments with Kylo Ren on that bridge does he finally accept that part of his character. Man, this is something that I need to like go away, think about, and then come back to, because now I'm thinking about when he appears to Ben in Rise of Skywalker, and how different Han is in that. And I also think about who he was in Solo, and if you bookend Han Solo as a character with those two things, the beginning of his story and the end of his story, how much closer he is to the feminine in both of those stories than he is throughout the original trilogy. And when we see him in The Force Awakens, um, he literally retreats from the feminine. He runs away from Leia, right? Like, and he regresses. He goes back to his old ways, and like that hyper masculine, getting into trouble, scoundrel Han Solo. I man, there's a lot there to unpack. But yeah, like that journey for that character, of you know embracing those aspects. Like, I think that's one of the reasons why the people rub against that. They don't like him in The Force Awakens. They don't like him in Solo. I think it's because that's what you're getting. You are getting those elements. You are getting a Han when he was younger that was closer to that part of his character. For whatever reason, we don't really have context for that, but we know that he was softer. He was a lot more like Luke, right? Like in Solo, he's a lot more like Luke.
Mm.
And then in the original trilogy, he's very hard until Return of the Jedi, at which point, all of a sudden now he's got these people who would sacrifice everything to save him, and it softens him, right? And in that process, it's the scene that you talk about, where he he comes at Leia with that old Han Solo way of thinking from before he went into the carbonite, right? Where she's like, I can't tell you, I can't talk to you about this right now. I need to be alone with this for a minute.
Mm.
And his immediate response is jealous, it's petty, it's aggressive, right? It's like, oh, could you tell Luke? Is that who you could tell? Whatever, man. And like he goes
Yeah.
to storm off. And then it's in that moment that he catches himself, and he's like, this woman dressed up as a bounty hunter, infiltrated Jabba's palace, and was caught and ultimately like humiliated and subjugated and traumatized to save your life. And that's how you're going to treat her right now? Like, it happens in an instant, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
a flash.
Yeah.
But it's there. He has a realization of like, what the fuck am I doing? I love her. And he turns around and he goes, I'm sorry. I'm an idiot. Like, he just, like, it's so, I love that about Han Solo.
Yeah.
I love that about Han Solo so much, because in the same way that the cool guy, you look strong enough to pull the ears off of Gundark, like all of that stuff, like that guy that Luke Skywalker looks up to, I look up to, and I want to be like that guy in a lot of situations. But then he has this moment with Leia in Return of the Jedi where he shows his vulnerability. He literally drops the pretense in an instant, and turns around and apologizes for it. That's actually the guy that I should want to be more, right, than the cool guy that's too cool for school and like everybody looks up to in that way. Is like, because that guy is surface, that guy's shallow, like that guy is, what you see is what you get. But the guy that has been through those trials and tribulations and realizes that the people that he cares about are more important than any bravado, that's the guy that we should want to be. And I love when we see him in The Force Awakens, that he has, although he's regressed in a lot of ways, he still carries that, right? Because he has the great moment, one of my favorite moments in the sequel trilogy with Finn, where he's like, "Hey Solo, did you just call me Solo?" and then Finn's going on, and Han turns to him, he hands him the this big blaster rifle, and he goes, "Women always find out, like they always find out the truth, always." Right, and it's like that's the Han from the Ewok village that
Yeah.
turned around and said sorry,
Yeah.
right? That's the Han that says, when Leia pulls out the blaster and is like, "Don't worry, I got you," right? He's like, "I love you," because he doesn't have to be that guy with Leia.
Yeah.
He can be who he was on Corellia before everything,
Hmm.
before the betrayal by Kira, before he became the cynic and all. Like he can Leia allows him to be that guy, and when he says that to Finn, what he's saying to Finn is like, what she's got is what you're missing. It's not about women being better than men, and I think people misinterpret that sort of thing. It's like, it's not about women being better than men. It's about men denying femininity, right? It's about men denying the role of women in their lives, and the feminine aspect in their lives, and softness and compassion and love and caring and nurturing and all of that stuff. It's about like saying like she's gonna figure it out, because she's tuned into things that you're not, because you're so busy worried about what everybody thinks of you, right? Like, he's trying to teach that lesson in the best way that he can, and it's like, I love that line so much. That's Lawrence Kasdan,
Mm.
right? That's the thing about The Force Awakens. It's like, a lot of the decisions from JJ are things that were like, that I look at and I go like, I don't like this. A lot of the good stuff, and like, I think JJ brings a lot of great stuff to The Force Awakens, and I think he brings a lot of great stuff to The Rise of Skywalker as well. The difference between those two movies is Lawrence Kasdan and Chris Terrio, right?
Mm.
Because Lawrence Kasdan is a guy who is in touch. He is self-actualized. He's done the work, right? It's there in Empire, it's there in Return of the Jedi, it's there in The Force Awakens, and it's there in Solo. um yeah, a line like that is something that you are only going to get from Lawrence Kasdan, I think, in my opinion, in a Star Wars movie. And yeah, if they really wanted the sequel trilogy to be totally successful, they all three movies should have been written by Lawrence Kasdan. As much as I love Ryan Johnson and The Last Jedi, I firmly believe that. Like, the biggest mistake in Rise of Skywalker isn't bringing back JJ, it's not bringing back Lawrence Kasdan, or at least having a better writer than Chris Terrio. Like, Chris Terrio being the guy to write that movie was the mistake. But yeah, Han Solo,
Han Solo.
he's pretty great.
He's a pretty good dude.
What's your number one?
My number one's Yoda. Yoda is just you know, the personification of your eyes can deceive you, don't trust them. Where
Yeah.
first of all, we're in this fantastical world where essentially Muppets are like a thing. They're just a thing. Like, you walk into that cantina and you see all these crazy looking creatures. It's like, oh, okay. Don't really bat an eyelash because it's just it's Tuesday for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then you get to Empire Strikes Back, where not only is this awesome little silly frog guy really funny, he also just happens to be one of the wisest people in the entire galaxy. And it's just the whole looks can be deceiving lesson, and not only who he is, but the lessons that he imparts. Like, I can't tell you how much on a almost daily basis that one of my friends or Tina or whoever will say, I don't know, okay, I'm gonna try. And I'm just like, nope, no, we're not. No, we're not
Yeah.
trying. We're
Yeah.
gonna do it. And it's just, I don't know, man. Like, I feel like I got into Star Wars like many of us, where it was just that, those formative years, like you said, and just, I remember my little brain exploding just watching Yoda, and because like had seen the films out of order,
Mm.
and the first time I actually sat down to watch Empire Strikes Back, I didn't already know Yoda was Yoda. Because like when I started, Luke had already left Dagobah the first time I saw Empire Strikes Back. So I was more than halfway through Empire Strikes Back and then into Return of the Jedi. And as soon as they left Tatooine, uh, that like I had to go home because I think it was on the Sci-Fi Channel or whatever. So I saw, my friends were already watching Empire Strikes Back. So I literally didn't see anything with Yoda. So when I finally sat down and watched the films, I watched Empire Strikes Back first, and because like that's where I had started, and I wanted to see the beginning of it, and all the stuff with Yoda, I fell for it with Luke. Like, and
Mm.
I also learned the lesson. Hey, looks can be deceiving. Don't judge a book by its cover. And it was so delightfully surprised, and just I don't know, man. Everything in Empire Strikes Back left such an impression on me, and man, I don't know. Like he's another little guy. He's a little guy, but he's like the smartest little guy ever.
Mm. Yeah, I think one of the great things about Yoda is that he appears to be a little guy, and he has the aspects of a little guy on
Mm,
purpose. Like, like, oh man, this is great. I because this discussion has now just like reinforced my theory on little guys and George Lucas's attitude about them. Because if you think about Yoda and the way that Yoda is portrayed, Yoda puts on the aspect of the little guy in order to put Luke on his back foot, right? Like he
mm,
uses it against Luke. Um, which is fantastic that he does that, because it's a put on, but it's also not, right? Like
mm.
it's also very much like it is an aspect of Yoda. Like it is a part of that character, and he embraces that part of himself. Um, and that's something that's like reinforced in some of the novels and that sort of thing during the Clone Wars. But
Do we also?
I
I mean, this is part of the appearance of the little guy. Maybe. I mean,
yeah,
maybe not because it's not just when he's putting up that like front. Do we know who actually decided that Yoda was going to have that strange backwards way of speaking? Was it George or was it Frank Oz?
I think it was George. I'm pretty sure it
Okay.
was George. Yeah. Um, and because and like there's an aspect of that like people have asked about other others of Yoda's species
Hmm.
and whether or not they talk that way.
Well, yeah, Yaddle doesn't.
And Yaddle doesn't. Like it's not a thing about the species. Like that's Yoda.
Mm,
Like Yoda
yeah.
talks that way. And why does Yoda talk that way? I don't like there's a story there. The thing about Yoda that I think is great and I think is always should always be maintained is like never tell us.
Yeah. Yeah,
Never
I
tell
want
us where he
Yoda to
came
be
from.
mysterious. Yeah.
Never explain why he speaks that way and others don't. Like Yoda is Yoda. Allow at least a character in Star Wars to always be mysterious,
Mhm.
right? And if you're going to, then it should be Yoda.
Yeah.
Um, and so like the existence of Grogu is the thing that can kind of be counter to that, but also it doesn't have to be, right? Like I think the key there, I don't know. There's so much more that they could have done in that episode of Mando with Luke and Grogu. No, Book of Boba Fett. Sorry, so easy to get that confused. I There's so much more that they could have done there about Luke's understanding of Yoda and what he imparts to Grogu. But I mean, I think one of the big things there is that Luke has a very flawed memory of Yoda, of who Yoda was,
Mm.
based on what he says to Grogu in that scene. Because he says some things, and the choice that he gives Grogu is um, counter to some of the lessons that Yoda taught him, and then counter to some of the lessons that he learned on his own. But that's the thing about Luke. It was conversation for another day. I but yeah, Yoda needs to always be that part of Star Wars. Um, I think you can explain everything else, honestly. Like you can get into midichlorians and M counts and cloning experiments and all of that sort of stuff. I think that's fun actually to get into that stuff. Even like the wills and going into the force and vergences and the world between worlds and all of that stuff. Yeah, explain away, man. The gods of Mortis, whatever. Explain away. Create all of this mythology around the force. Never explain Yoda. Never explain Yoda. Never explain how Yoda is able to talk to Ezra through the force in the temple. Don't explain it to me. I don't need an explanation. Well, how is Yoda able to do that? He's Yoda. Why doesn't he do that with Luke? I don't know. He's Yoda. He had his reasons. He knew what he was doing. I yeah, man. Yoda is such I think the thing about that character is how unique, but also completely like there is no, you don't question what that character is about.
Yeah.
Right? Like as unique as he is in pop culture, very singular, right? When we see Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid, like the archetype is the same, like that sort of like that mysterious, misunderstood wise teacher, right? But it's not exactly the same. Mr. Miyagi is not Yoda. Yoda is not Mr. Miyagi. Like Yoda is a very singular character. There's not a lot of characters in pop culture, I think, that are that way. But George and George, I think it's very specifically the alchemy of George Lucas, Irvin Kershner, and Frank Oz, right? I think you remove any one of those elements, and I think that it changes the mix. It changes the mix a lot, right? Because like Return of the Jedi, Yoda is still good, but like I don't know, there's not a lot. There's not a lot for Yoda in that one, right? Obi-Wan actually does most of the heavy lifting in that story. But and then in the prequel trilogy, obviously Yoda is very different. And he's portraying a character at a very different point in his life, but he is not the Yoda of Empire Strikes Back, right? There's a very specific magic to that character in Empire that, despite him being a janky little puppet of very limited expression, I don't know, man. I forget every time. And I've seen pictures of Frank Oz underneath the stage and with like trapdoors popped open and that thing on his hand, right? And I've seen the puppet inert, and I've seen the puppet being sculpted, and guys like you and I have seen every single aspect of that character.
And that puppet's deteriorated now. And we've seen that too. Like it looks horrible.
But it doesn't matter. I watch Empire, and what's in there, only what you take with you. Like but like that character and that delivery and that the way that he exists in that world is so genuine. It's so sincere. And like that's, I don't know, to me, like that's the key. That's the key, is that you couldn't have a more absurd character in Star Wars. Like purposely, this, like George designed him this way, right? It's supposed to be absolutely bonkers. You're supposed to go like, what are you talking about? This little big-eared frog man is the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy. No, nobody said anything about power. Right? Oh, he's a warrior. No, nobody ever said that. Obi-Wan simply said, you must go to Yoda and Dagobah. He's the Jedi master that instructed me. Luke fills in those gaps, right? And we as an audience fill in those gaps, and we turn Yoda into a legend before we've even seen him. Which, like, I don't have that context that you have. Like, I knew who Yoda was pop culturally before I'd ever seen any of the movies. So it's like,
Mhm.
so I see Yoda and like, yeah, I've always had to take it from a very different perspective. But yeah, like at the same time, it's like I understand the context and I've done the work, I've done the studying, right, to know how that character was perceived originally and the purpose of him and the intent of him, the frog by the side of the road, right? You know, if you just walk away, then you don't get the gift, right? But if you're the one who helps the frog turns into a wizard or a, you know, a fairy queen or whatever, and it bestows magic, right? It gives you a boon, right? Like that's the lesson, right? Don't judge a book by its cover, right? Your eyes can deceive you, all of that stuff. Yeah, man, Yoda's so great, to the degree that like he persists as an icon of Star Wars. There are those characters that transcend the character and become something more, right?
Yeah.
And they're the ones that get put on lunchboxes, and that's what, like, you can give Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni all the credit you want for Grogu and the success of that character. They are trading on, at that point in time, 30 plus years, almost 40 years essentially, of iconography, right? Um, that they don't deserve the credit for that, as far as I'm concerned. They took one of the Launchbox characters and they made him cute. Right? Like they turned him into, like, they did a baby version. They did a Muppet baby. Grogu is the Muppet baby of Yoda. I've never put it in those terms before for myself or on a podcast, but that is literally what Grogu is, right? Like the Muppets are great, the Muppet Babies are transcendent, right? Like there's something about Muppet Babies that it's like, what a stupid concept. But the Muppet Babies are amazing
Yeah,
because
most
the
babies
Muppets
awesome.
are already this thing that is like approachable and fun and whatever, but then like subversive because, you know, this frog is running a variety show, right? And the bear's a comedian, but he's not a very good one. Right? And it's like all of these ridiculous things about them, and then it's like, yeah, but what if we made them super cute? Like, what if we made them obscenely cute? Like, cute to the degree that it's kind of gonna make you vomit a little bit as an adult. Well, kids fucking eat it up. So, yeah, that's what Grogu is. They just, like, they took Yoda and they just made a Muppet baby of Yoda, which, like, the logic, the math works out because Yoda is a Muppet, right? Um, there are people who argue against that. It's like Yoda is a Muppet, lowercase m, Muppet, right? He is not one of the Muppets, but the Muppets is a different thing. The Muppets
Mhm.
is a group, right? Like the Muppets is literally
Like
like
a band.
a comedy troupe,
Yeah.
right? Like they're a comedy troupe. That's what they are. But the Muppets are all Muppets, and 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 some of them are puppets, but not all Muppets are puppets.
Mhm.
There are some humans that are Muppets,
Right.
both in the sense that they are a lowercase Muppet because, like, look at that person is a Muppet. But then also, like, there are some human beings that have been members of the Muppets. I think there's a TikTok or something like this, where a dude like explains that. He's got like a Venn diagram of like you know, Kermit is the one that's like in the center. He's a puppet, a Muppet, and a capital M Muppet, right? But like Yoda is a puppet and a Muppet, but not a member of the Muppets, right? But if he is a Muppet, then he can be Muppet babified, right? Like,
Right.
and that's what Grogu is. Grogu is a Muppet baby of Yoda, and that's why Grogu is on every piece of merchandise at Disneyland, because you've taken the lunchbox icon of Yoda. It's just literally, like, you can break Yoda down into if you have a circle and two triangles, you can make people recognize that that's Yoda. If you can make it green, it's instant. It's instant, right? That's icon status, like literally icon status. Like you can turn him into an icon with three shapes, and one color, and people will instantly know. Like I would say probably 8 out of 10 people will instantly know that that is Yoda, right? And they'll be able to say Yoda even if they've never watched Star Wars. They can still go, oh, that's that Yoda guy, right? that's that Yoda. That's that guy from Star Wars. He's like the one. He talks funny. Yeah, he deserves to be on this list.
I agree.
It's crazy to me that he's in your number one spot.
Yeah, he's always been my number one.
That's crazy
Always.
because like as much as we've talked about Star Wars, I don't think that I've ever gotten that impression from you. But
really,
but you
yeah,
know
Yoda's
what?
my guy. Yeah.
Like we talk about the prequels a lot, and we talk about Clone Wars a lot,
Yeah.
and obviously we've done 3 seasons of Bad Batch together over on Rebel Cells. So like Yoda is a character that's not going to come up in that conversation very much. So it's interesting that I think just the path that we have walked together as Star Wars fans, Yoda hasn't come up that much.
And
But
it's funny too, just because before you mentioned like Han Solo's your favorite, original trilogy character, but he's not even close to your favorite Star Wars character. And I thought the same, like, oh yeah, that's pretty crazy how much good Star Wars we've gotten that an original trilogy character isn't even like your top 5.
Yeah. I mean, it is ridiculous, right? Because I mean, like an original trilogy character is because Obi-Wan's my number one, but
sure, but you know what I mean. Like,
but contextually, yeah, you're right because we talked about this before we started recording. It's the Ewan, James Arnold Taylor of it that is my favorite character. It's not the Alec Guinness. I love Alec Guinness and I love that Obi-Wan so much. And he would be number 4. He would be number 4 on my list, but yeah, like I can't put Obi-Wan from the original trilogy as high on the list as I put those other characters because it's just, like he doesn't really do that much in the original trilogy, and he's a very basic character in that respect. He's very archetypical. He's not even as complex as Yoda, right? Yoda gets to steal that thunder in Empire to a great degree. Obi-Wan gets to come in Return of the Jedi and like sweep up, but I with the certain point of view stuff, but yeah, like Yoda gets to do all the heavy lifting in the original trilogy in terms of like Jedi wisdom and all of that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, like that is the gift horse that I think that a lot of people are looking in the mouth when we talk about Star Wars. In the modern discourse, right? Like with people who are like, "Oh, Disney era Star Wars, blah blah," and it's like, yeah, but like my favorite characters in Star Wars are so heavily influenced by the Disney era. Because if I run down my top 5, like I'll just do it real quick because it's solidified. And it has very recently changed, but it is solidified. So it's Obi-Wan at number 1. Kanan Jarrus at number 2, introduced in Star Wars Rebels, a Disney Star Wars character, one of the first Disney Star Wars characters. Poe Dameron, another character introduced in the Disney era. Rey, the tentpole character of the Disney Star Wars era, the most important character of the Disney Star Wars era. Maybe debatable, maybe it's Grogu, but most important to the bottom line of Disney is Grogu, but that's a whole other thing. And then number 5 was Darth Maul, only by virtue of the Disney era of Star Wars because of Star Wars Rebels. But he was recently unseated by Chimere, right? Like Chimere is in my top 5 because that character just like came out of nowhere as like, this is the best bad guy Star Wars has ever had as far as I'm concerned. And he stands on the shoulders of characters like Darth Maul and Darth Vader. Obviously, we don't get Chimere without those characters, but at the same time, Chimere is better than. I mean, like Chimere is everything that Darth Vader, Darth Maul, and Kylo Ren want to be, right? And then he's also a little guy underneath. But we've talked about it. Darth Maul's a little guy, so is Kylo Ren. It's a thing. We need to do it. We need to come back to the concept of little guys because we talked about it on that Ahsoka episode. But we need to come back to the concept of little guys at some point. And maybe what we should do is we should do like the top 10 little guys.
Oh, I like it.
Right. Or maybe even like we did with lightsabers, we might have to just go through and just
rank our favorite little guys. Oh God, guys. That's gonna be impossible.
It'll take so long just to compile the list. I think one thing that has to happen with something like that is we need to do a bunch of that off the podcast. Like we need to do that in some other form, of like taking it from like 100 little guys and getting it down to like 50, and then from the 50, you and I can start to put together an actual list. And then we can talk about the top 10.
Damn, I like that's gonna be hard, man.
It's a lot of work.
Real hard.
It's a lot of work, but because we're talking about, that would be like all of Star Wars, right? So
yeah,
you're talking about Legends, you're talking about EU, like the current EU and the films, the shows, all of it. There are so many little guys. There are so many little guys, and there are many little guys that you don't think are little guys, and there are many guys that look like little guys that aren't little guys, right? And so I don't know. I think we need to. Little guy being sort of the thesis, I think, of Forced Perspectives as a podcast. It's like I think that at some point we need to get definitive with it, and we need to really we need to have an episode or a series dedicated to it. I'm gonna go ahead and say that is earmarked for after Skeleton Crew. We get through Skeleton Crew, because here's one of the main reasons: we don't know how many little guys are coming.
Oh man! Oh no!
Just from the trailer alone, we know instantly Neil is a top 10 little guy, right? Like Neil is on that list right now, sight unseen, right? Because Neil is he is designed to be a little guy. But then there's that owl dude in the Skeleton Crew trailer, and then I don't know, Jude Law's character might be a little guy. He might be a little guy, you guys. I think that he might be, because there's oh, you're a Jedi. He's not a Jedi. Let's all be super clear. He's not a Jedi. So whatever nonsense, whatever malarkey that he's up to, that he's pretending to be a Jedi for these kids, that's little guy behavior.
Yeah.
That's in the same way that Kylo Ren is throwing hissy fits all the time. That's his that's the thing that lets you know that underneath the badass is a little guy. Is because real badasses don't throw hissy fits,
right?
But little guys absolutely do when they're trying to be tough, right? That's a hallmark of a little guy. So, anyways, as I said, we need to do a whole series on little guys. We have to have a whole episode where we just define what it is. We just talk for an hour about what makes a little guy, so that we can have our criteria that we then compile the list from. Right? Because if we just try and go and do the list, I think that there's going to be a lot of back and forth, and it's going to be very difficult to do that. But if we really nail down what it is and have criteria of this is what makes a little guy, and then from that criteria we can then go okay, power rankings, right? What aspects of little guyness does Yoda have versus Kylo Ren versus Neil, right? And then we can I have never been more serious about one of these rankings, and I always, when we go into these, I'm we go fly by the seat of our pants, and it's definitely a gut thing, and you and I have great conversations, and they're great episodes. But I'm always we really need to quantify this stuff in some way, right? I've always wanted to do a ranking of the Star Wars movies, but quantified of story, characters, comedy, action, effects, and have a bunch of have basically 10 things that we're scoring, and then give them literal scores.
So and scientifically come up with
the and then little guy. and then to look at those numbers and to have a formula in order to determine who is the littlest guy. I think this is a thing that you and I need to do. I think it needs to be our mission. I think that for 2025, Forced Perspectives 2025, we need to do what Lucasfilm and Star Wars are too afraid to do, right? Because right now they're all about catering to the anti little guy, right? And in doing so, I really feel like we're losing a lot of what makes Star Wars great. And I think like the creatives are trying to hold on to it, but yeah, if this talking about original trilogy characters today in the way that we did, we got to wrap this up. But talking about them in the way that we did in this episode, I think one thing becomes really clear. We look at our list, because let's look at our list. I'm pretty sure that we've got 6 characters, 5 out of 6 little guys. They're all little guys to varying degrees. The only one who isn't, Leia. She's not a little guy. Leia is not a little guy. I think that helps people understand the definition of what a little guy is. At no point, even when Leia was literally a little guy in Obi-Wan, no little guy energy whatsoever. That's what's great about the character, right? Is that Obi-Wan's like, look at this little guy, and then she's like, A, not little, A, B, not a guy, right? And she's like just she just reads in the riot act, right? And that's Leia to a T from the get-go. Like she remembers what Padme looks like, and Luke doesn't, right? Even though they both spent the same amount of time with her. So like, no nonsense from Princess Leia. But let's look at the rest of the list, right? R2, definitive little guy, right? The template by which all of the little guys are going to be judged. Luke Skywalker, 1,000% a little guy. Don't even with me. He's a little guy. Han Solo, you might want him to be a super cool tough guy. Not little guy. He's a little guy on the inside. He just denies it. And then Yoda, Yoda is a little guy, but Yoda is not a little guy, but he is a little guy. Yoda's tough. He's a tough cookie, but that's what we love about him, right? But look at that list. It's just a list of little guys. And that's what's important about Star Wars is, like the little guyness, because even Leia, who is not a little guy, is only measured as such in contrast to her little guyness, right? You understand what I'm saying? Like she stands out within Star Wars. She is a subversive character because she's not a little guy. At no point is she a little guy. It never happens. Start to finish. She is always something else. And that is that's a definitive quality. But it can only be a definitive quality because she is surrounded by these hapless little guys all the time, right? It's like she can't get away from them. She's like, it's like, because Obi-Wan is very much in his little guy era in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, and she's like, snap out of it. This is not who you are, right? And then he becomes Obi-Wan again, and he is no longer a little guy at that point, but he behaves in some little guy ways. And then like she's surrounded by these boys, she got R2, Luke, Han, Chewie. 3PO is the only one who's not a little guy other than her, right? And even the guy that they're fighting, Vader, he's a little guy trapped in a big tough guy suit. He just wants to get out. He just wants to get out. And then you get to the sequel trilogy, and it's like, and the thing, she relates to Rey so much because she's like, can you believe it with all these little guys? Can you believe it with all this? They're just like, they don't understand. They're just a bunch of little guys. This Finn guy and this Poe guy and this Han Solo guy coming back. And this Hux guy over here and then my son is such a little guy, and I just wish he would realize that that's okay, but his father didn't set a very good example for him. And it's, we just all need to embrace the little guy and Star Wars. This is our mission for 2025, Joe. And I'm going to start. I'm going to plan this out. It's going to be like, I'm putting it in the schedule. I'm putting it in the schedule. This is the thing that the medication, for people who are curious, I take Vyvanse. And this is what it has done to me, is it has turned me into like a real planner. Like that's what, like when that stuff is in my blood, it just tells me like, make plans and nothing can go wrong. It's the Vyvanse is incorrect, right? Like I make the plans and then I don't execute the plan. But I spend a lot of time making the plans. But we're gonna make the plan. We're gonna execute the plan, and then the plan's gonna fail. But it's okay. I don't care. The plan failing is nobody listening to the podcast, and it's me thinking that like if we do this, like, Joe, this is going to be our thing. This is going to be our signature, right? The little guy thing is going to be our signature, and we're going to blow up, and we're going to have a viral TikTok at some point, and all of a sudden, you know, like, we're going to be the ones being invited to all of the premieres and what, right? Like that's where my brain goes. Like, my brain gets on that track and starts going. It's like, yeah, man, this is going to be it. And then we do it, and it's like, no one cares. No one cares about my little guy thesis. I care so
I
much,
care.
though. Yeah, you care.
I care.
That's it. That's it, guys.
Did it.
Listen, this, I don't know what this episode will end up being, because there's actually a bunch of stuff that I got to cut out of this runtime. It'll be over 2 hours though, and you're welcome. You're welcome. Star Wars.
Yeah.
I love Star Wars. You love Star Wars. That's what this podcast is about. Everybody else can kick rocks.
Damn.
Who doesn't love Star Wars? You know what I mean? Like if you're not here for it, then I don't want to hear it.
I don't remember. I told someone this in the past like couple of months, but like I remember being in high school, my first year, the guidance counselor. It's like every year you had a different guidance counselor, and the freshman year guidance counselor. So we're talking like 2000, yeah, 2000. The guidance counselor was a huge Star Wars fan, huge, and everybody knew it. And like he would always make Star Wars references and stuff. And there was a kid that I actually grew up with on my block who used to like Star Wars when we were like really young kids, but then when we got to high school, he was, too cool for school. And we run a class, so every year we had an actual, like, out of every 6 days was, the schedule was different, and then it would rotate back into day 1 of 6. And one of those days, one 45-minute class was guidance class. So, the counselor would get together and talk sex ed stuff like that. Just basically teaching you how to be a grown-up kind of thing. And like I said, so this guidance counselor, Mr. Tedeschi, awesome dude, absolutely loved him. He would talk about, like I said, various topics for young men. And he made a Star Wars reference at one point, and this kid who, like I said, used to love it and was too cool for school was like, Star Wars is so lame. Like, why do you like Star Wars so much? It's just so lame. And he just looked that kid dead in the eye, and he said, you can tell a lot about a person by how they feel about Star Wars. And that was it. That's all he said. That's all and you could see, like, something about what he said, like, I don't know, like, it really affected that kid for the rest of the day. I wouldn't say changed his ways, so to speak, but like, yeah, I'll never forget that as long as I live, because I was like, yeah, you jerk.
That's where that's the thing where people say, like, oh, I hate small talk, right? And I'm one of those people. I really don't like small talk. I think it's actually a common trait amongst people with ADHD and neurodivergence. I think autistic people also feel similarly, but I think for people with ADHD, when your brain is going at a mile a minute and you're interacting with, I'll be nice and call them normies. That's the nicest way that I can put it. But
Muggles.
Yeah, I don't like using that term anymore because it supports a terrible person, right?
True.
Mondays is another way, mundanes, but I feel like mundane is because I think that's from Fables. I think that's from the comic book Fables, but I like when you're talking to another person that is perhaps not on that level. That's not a judgment. That's just a they're different stratums. Like, it's just
civilians.
Yeah, it's just the way that it is, right? I don't want to talk about the weather. I don't want to talk about. Don't ask me how it's going, right? Like, and there are a few people in my life who get it, like who do like truly under. It's wonderful because I always feel seen when I interact with these people, and this happens. They'll like one guy that I used to work with, one of the managers at VPs at the company that I used to work for. He would ask me about the latest pop culture thing, right? Oh, what do you think of what do you think of Star Wars? Like whatever Star Wars movie or Mandalorian or whatever. What do you think of the latest Marvel movie? Whatever. He would ask me that question. At which point I would then say to him, like, what are you looking for right now? Right? Like, which one do you want? Do you want the short answer or do you want the real answer? And he'd be like, give me the go ahead. Right? At which point I would then like launch into it. Right? That's where like that's what I want. Like that's the level that I want. Like I want to be at the place with a person where they know like and for me to also understand their comfortability to be able to offer them the option of like I can give you the like 30 words or less of like, yeah, man, it's awesome. If you like the other ones, definitely go see it. Right. Like, I can do that. I'm very good at masking in that way. Um, but yeah, when people allow you to go off, like that's very much in the same thing of like I don't want to talk to you about your thoughts on local politics or or the weather or what you have for breakfast, right? Like get rid of that small talk bullshit, right? What I want to know, what's your favorite dinosaur? Because like in the same way, like you can tell a lot about a person based on their opinion of Star Wars, right? Like you can also like the way that you answer, it's not the answer. I don't care what your favorite dinosaur is. People who like triceratops are not better than people who like brachiosaurus. What I'm looking for here when I ask that question, when I say that like that's what I want to talk about, I'm looking for how well you answer the question. It's not it's like in school when you do essay questions, right? When there's an essay question, it's less about whether the answer is right or wrong. That's not what your teacher is measuring, especially in English class, right? That's not what your teacher is measuring, or at least it shouldn't be. Some English teachers suck. There's no accounting for bad teachers. It's unfortunate. It's a reality of the education system. A good English teacher is not looking at what your answer is. They're looking at how you answered the question, right? And and that is what I'm looking for. Is like when I ask you what your favorite dinosaur is, when we do a ranking of Pokemon, it's not about I don't want to hear cuz he's cool. Get out of here. Get out of here. Tell me why. Tell As the Backstreet Boys so eloquently put, tell me why, Joseph. Yeah, yeah. I so that I would have gotten along very well with that guidance counselor.
Yeah, he
Um,
was awesome.
yeah, yeah. That was such a wonderful thing as a youth, when you would encounter the adults
Oh, forget it.
that
That
still
love
had
Star
it,
Wars. Yeah, absolutely.
that were still connected to the magic in the way that I hope that you and I still are. Yeah,
I'm
never
actually
let go. Never
I'm
let go of
actually
that.
still friends with one of them from my childhood.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
I In typical fashion, I said we got to wrap this up. Let's and I know. Listen, guys, you don't need to call it out on the Discord. Okay, all right, enough. It was. We have a
Do
new
it.
phrase.
Do
We have a
it.
new phrase around here because Cassie is somewhat of a jokester. She fancies herself a little miniature comedian. And what I am trying to teach her is because she is funny. She is legitimately a very funny kid. She's got chops. She says hilarious stuff. She does hilarious stuff. But she's been bitten by the bug a little bit, and as a result, some hacky behavior is coming about. And so we have a new phrase around the house, which is one time is funny, two times is silly, three times is annoying. Right? That's the so. Anyways, I yeah. So you guys, once was funny, two times is silly, three times is annoying. No,
Four times
whatever.
is hilarious.
Four times. Listen. She's not ready for that lesson yet, but there is a because The Simpsons knows this very well. In one of the best episodes, I can't remember the title right now, but the Silent Bob one, right? And Silent Bob, not Silent Bob, Sideshow Bob. I the man, I can't even remember right now what movie it's referencing. It's like falling out of my head. This is getting older, but I there's the episode where Bob is released from prison, and then like Bart's worried that he's gonna try and kill, but he's like, I'm reformed and all that stuff, right? There's the great gag that exemplifies exactly what you just said, of like, well, fourth time is hilarious. It's the rakes. Because that's a thing with Sideshow Bob, is like, is the rake, right? Like, it says when he steps and he hits, and the rake hits him in the face. One time is funny. He steps, second time, okay, second rake. Okay, now we're silly. A suspension of disbelief, everybody. It's The Simpsons. Every once in a while, we get really absurd like this. Sometimes Homer falls down a cliff and he should be dead, but he's not. He's just very hurt. And then what makes it The Simpsons is that that's not the end of the joke, right? Because that's the Looney Tunes. That's the end of the joke. The second rake is the end of the joke. Even the third rake might be the end of the joke for the Looney Tunes. The fourth rake is where it gets into The Simpsons. And for that Homer gag, it's not him falling down. He's on the skateboard, right? He goes over the thing and then he falls down and he's like very badly injured. The thing that makes it The Simpsons and that elevates it to a sophisticated level that modern Simpsons, I think, misses is the him getting helicoptered out. And as he's getting helicoptered out, he's in like the gurney suspended from the helicopter, and as it's leaving the canyon or whatever, it's bonking his head on every place that he hit on the way down, he hits on the way back up. That's The Simpsons. And I don't know how many rakes there are in that gag that we actually see Sideshow Bob step on. It's at least 5. But then we pull back, and when we pull back, we reveal that he is surrounded by rakes, and we don't know how long he was caught getting hit by the rakes. But Cassie's not ready for that yet. She's not ready for that yet. She's not,
what the Discord is. Come on, guys.
Listen, the Discord might be. All right, it might be. Some of them might be. Some of you might not be. All right, I'm just that's a little bit of tough love for you guys. Because it is coming from a place of love, but also like, come on, guys. 3 times is annoying. And as such, it is impossible to end the podcast. So sometimes I just have to end it. Thank you guys for listening. Thanks for hanging out. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. We'll see you then. Follow Force Perspectives on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ForcePOV. And join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. Support the show by visiting us at patreon.com/thunderquack to get early access to episodes, leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast service, or buy merch at store.thunderquack.com. Force Perspectives is a part of the ThunderQuack Podcast Network.